Everyone. Thank you for your patience. We are now at quorum, so I'd like to begin the meeting today. Welcome to the Assembly Bill 32 Environmental Justice Advisory Committee meeting. My name is Ashley Giorgio with the Air Resources Board, manager of the Office of Environmental Justice, Tribal Affairs, and Border Relations. I have the pleasure of working closely with the staff and management team in supporting the EJAC. We are really happy to have you here today and are looking forward to the discussion. This meeting is being held in Sacramento at the Cal EPA headquarters building and is open to the public. We also have participation today in Zoom. I would like to begin with the EJAC member roll call. Please note that we have EJAC members that are joining us via Zoom remotely, and also those count towards our quorum requirement per Bagley-Keene requirements. EJAC members, if you could do me a favor, when you say your name, please say here or present, and also state clearly whether you are here in the room or remotely participating. This information has also been posted online for the public. So we will start with roll call. Martha Dina Arguello.
Present, and I am on Zoom.
Thank you. Juan Flores.
Present, and I am also in the Zoom meeting.
Thank you. Angel Garcia has resigned as of the 1st of February. Catherine Garupa.
Here in the room.
Yep. Kevin Hamilton. John Harriel Jr. Thomas Helm.
I am here in the room.
Thank you. Matt Holmes.
Present, remote.
Thank you. John Kevin Jefferson III. Mayor Ray Leon. Luis Olmedo. Jill Sherman Warren. I saw her in Zoom, but we'll wait again. Sharifa Taylor.
I'm here virtually in the meeting.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sharifa. Really appreciate that. And I'll state this again. Jill Sherman Warren, just in case. And I will promote you to panelist, Jill, because it looks like you are not currently. Jill Sherman Warren.
Sorry, yeah, I wasn't. That's why I was raising my hand up and down. I am.
Oh, no problem.
Warren. I am present and I am remote. Thank you.
Thank you, Jill. So we are at quorum. I would now like to switch to our housekeeping and meeting logistics, the fun part of every meeting. Before we jump into content, I will cover Zoom information, Spanish interpretation, and a few critical details related to the Sacramento facilities. For those who are participating in person, restrooms are outside the door to the left and down the hall by the drinking fountains. In case of an emergency, please exit out the doors and proceed down the stairs. For members of the public participating remotely, you will be able to raise your hand in Zoom and speak during the public comment period. We will be providing advance notice of when you should be raising your hand to be in queue to provide comments. When it is your turn, the host will ask you to unmute, and after you push the unmute button, you may begin to speak at that time. We will be switching off between commenters in the room and in Zoom, and anticipate there will be a lot of participation in today's meeting. We intend to give each commenter 3 minutes to speak, but we will let you know if that changes based on the volume of comments. In the event that *6 does not work to unmute, we will be able to assist you. We really appreciate you staying on mute until it is your turn to speak to be respectful to everyone's turn. One really important part of today's meeting is to make sure that you state your name and affiliation, if applicable, so that we know who is speaking both in person and in Zoom. This will be particularly important for our court reporter who is participating today and following along in the conversation. Q&A and chat functions in Zoom are turned off for participants. And now I would really like to take the opportunity to introduce you to our 2 Spanish interpreters, Mark and Leticia. They are here online with us today. Can you please introduce yourself and provide the translated information on this slide? Thank you.
Good morning, Ashley. Good morning, everybody. We appreciate you having us here today. My name is Mark Gutierrez, one of your Spanish interpreters, along with my partner, Leticia Reina. We will relay the same instructions here for our Spanish-speaking audience. Muy buenos días a aquellos que nos acompañan de idioma español o de habla español. Queremos dejarles saber que la reunión el día de hoy se llevará a cabo aquí en persona en Sacramento de forma remota a través de Zoom. Miembros del público que participen de forma remota podrán levantar la mano en Zoom para participar durante el periodo de comentarios públicos. Cuando sea su turno, el anfitrión de la reunión le pedirá que active el sonido de su dispositivo y después, cuando presione el botón para activar su micrófono, puede comenzar a hablar. Estaremos turnándonos entre los comentaristas en la sala presencialmente y aquellos que se encuentran por videoconferencia en Zoom. Dado que tenemos mucho que abarcar hoy, tendremos un límite de 3 minutos por comentario, pero le avisaremos si eso cambia debido al volumen de comentarios recibidos. Aquellos que participen por teléfono, en caso de que no funcione estrella 6 para activar su micrófono, nosotros podemos ayudarle a activarlo. Por favor, déjenos saber. Y agradecemos que permanezca en silencio hasta que sea su turno de hablar para ser respetuoso con el turno de los demás. Cuando comente, por favor, indique su nombre y afiliación, si corresponde, para que sepamos quién está hablando. Haremos todo lo posible para hacer lo mismo aquí en la sala y para que el estenógrafo y el público sepa quién está comentando hasta este momento. Las funciones de preguntas y respuestas y el chat en Zoom están desactivados para los participantes. Thank you, Ashley. Back to you.
For those who are participating in person, to prevent echoes, we request that you click on the symbol next to the unmute button, as seen in number 1 on this slide. Next, select Leave Computer Audio, as seen in number 2, and also make sure to stay unmuted for the full duration of the meeting to avoid any background noise, as seen in number 3 on this slide. Mark, could you please provide those instructions in Spanish?
Y para aquellos que participen presencialmente, para evitar cualquier eco, le pedimos por favor que seleccione aquí el símbolo que aparece al lado del micrófono en la parte inferior de su pantalla, como puede ver aquí en la diapositiva número 1. Y a continuación seleccione el botón Dejar audio de computadora o Leave Computer Audio, como se ve en el número 2. Además, asegúrese por favor de permanecer en silencio durante toda la reunión para evitar ruido de fondo, como se ve aquí en el punto número 3. Back to you, Ashley.
Next, we will provide instructions for you for the Zoom globe, as seen in number 1. Please choose your preferred language as English or Spanish, as seen in number 2. Mark, please provide these instructions in Spanish.
A continuación, brindaremos instrucciones en inglés y en español y luego habilitaremos la función de interpretación en Zoom. Cuando aparezca el icono de un globo de interpretación en la parte inferior derecha de su pantalla, como puede ver aquí en el punto 1, elíjalo y elija su idioma preferido, ya sea inglés o español, como se ve en el punto número 2. Back to you, Ashley.
For those who are in the room and need in-person translation services, please don't hesitate to raise your hand and a staff person will assist you and log into Zoom. We also want to make sure that you have the appropriate headset and that it's working properly before begin speaking. Mark, please provide these instructions in Spanish.
Y para aquellos que nos acompañan aquí en la sala que necesiten interpretación, por favor, levante la mano y un miembro o funcionario del personal le iniciará una sesión de Zoom para poder escuchar la interpretación al vivo. Y si es necesario, tal vez hasta proveerle un conjunto de auriculares. El personal de CARP se asegurará de que esté encendido y funcionando bien su dispositivo antes de empezar la reunión. Back to you, Ashley.
If for any reason you experience any technical Zoom issues during today's meeting, please contact Bobby Rush, who's on the slide here, in person in Sacramento as well, and make sure that you email her based on the email provided on this slide. We will do our absolute best to assist you. Today's meeting is being recorded. Just as a reminder, we will post the EJAC meeting and events page with the recording in the weeks to come. This is the same website where you can find all of today's materials for the meeting. Mark, can you please provide these instructions in Spanish?
Si por algún motivo necesita algún soporte técnico en Zoom aquí en la reunión de hoy, por favor, comuníquese con Bobby Rush, quien está en persona aquí en Sacramento, y puede comunicarse con ella por correo electrónico como se indica en esta diapositiva en su pantalla. Haremos todo lo posible para ayudarle. La reunión de hoy está siendo grabada. El personal de CARB publicará en nuestro sitio web de reuniones y eventos en la página del Consejo de Justicia Ambiental aquí en las semanas que vienen. Este es el mismo sitio web donde puede encontrar todas las materias para la reunión de hoy, como se muestra en esta diapositiva. Thank you, Ashley. Back to you.
Thank you, Mark. I will now turn it over to the co-chairs, and I believe it's going to be Dr. Catherine providing us with the meeting agenda today.
Thank you, Ashley. Good morning and welcome, everyone. We will start today with introductions and opening remarks. Grateful to welcome Chair Randolph and Dr. Steve Cliff to speak to us this morning, and then co-chairs will also offer opening remarks. We will hear a report out about the third-party investigation from the June 2nd, 2023 EJAC meeting and the incident that happened. We will then take a lunch break from approximately 12 to 1:30. We will come back and discuss the low carbon fuel standard rulemaking, have public comment, take a break, and then next steps and closing remarks. And with that, I will pass it to co-chair Martha Dina Arguello for the EJAC meeting agreements.
Good morning, fellow EJAC members and Chair Leanne, and good to see you, Dr. Cliff. So I want to remind our fellow EJAC members, both in the room and online, what our meeting agreements are. Pay attention to equity of airtime, be present, be open and flexible in our approaches, be realistic about our ability to get through the full agenda. Always we seek out synergies in our work. We try to do yes and building upon each other's work. We ask that we listen and be compassionate and supportive. We reach for and inspire inspiration and intuition, look for ways to move forward. Look for ways to move toward action when possible, as well as looking forward. Respect the agenda and trust the process. Share responsibility for success. Next slide. I think we're gonna.
Yes, and we will begin the opening remarks with Chair Randolph.
All right, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for joining today's Environmental Justice Advisory Committee meeting. This is the first meeting of 2024, so I wanted to take a moment to kind of kick off the year and share a few thoughts. Our work with EJAC is an integral part of supporting our environmental justice and racial equity goals. So I wanted, on behalf of my colleagues on the board, to express our continued value of your insight and your expertise as you do this ongoing work as an advisory body to the board. EJAC plays a critical role in helping to ensure that the scoping plan considers the concerns of the state's most pollution burdened communities, and that implementation of the scoping plan and of AB 32 related work achieves those climate and public health and equity goals. We have certainly come a long way since the very beginning, the very first EJAC in 2009. EJAC recommendations have been a catalyst for CARB to engage in deeper, more constructive conversations to better define how the scoping plan and its implementation addresses environmental justice. Work doesn't stop after the adoption of the scoping plan, which we did in December of 2022. The real work starts afterwards. And so that gives us a greater opportunity to engage with EJAC as we do that implementation. And EJAC has the opportunity to dig deep and provide us recommendations and thoughts on issues that its members have raised to the board throughout the process. So the board and I will continue to focus on more equitable outcomes as we look at operationalizing racial equity, working with communities, trying to figure out ways to mutually define success and measure progress over time. Of course, our work with EJAC continues to be conducted through an open, transparent public process in compliance with all of our rules, like the Open Meetings Act, so that community members have an opportunity to be a part of these conversations. We want to make sure that the public has an opportunity to participate at EJAC meetings and feels welcome and feels a part of those conversations. As Dr. Cliff shared in January at the first CARB board meeting of 2024, our key priority is meeting the 2030 climate goals and the 2045 goal to be carbon neutral. But we need to do that in ways that improve public health and reduce disproportionate burdens. And so focusing on these goals is going to be a key part of the work in 2024. So I hope we can work collaboratively together, the board and EJAC, and that EJAC can craft or continue to craft actionable recommendations that help us achieve results. The EJAC Charter provides a framework for operationalizing the work and our collaboration. And I know there's some thinking and conversation going on about ways that we can update the Charter, make it more effective and reflect the goals and visions of EJAC. I think Dr. Cliff is going to be talking about that later, but I do think that's an important conversation. So I just wanted to take some time to demonstrate my ongoing support for EJAC and the work that you're doing. I also wanted to introduce you to my new Chief of Staff, Hazel Miranda. Those of you in the room had a chance to meet her. Those of you remotely will, I'm sure, have a chance to meet her in person in the future as well. I want to make sure that she's available as a resource to all of you in working with my office. If you need anything from me or my office, please feel free to reach out to either me or to Hazel. Unfortunately, I have some other commitments. So after agenda item 2, I'm going to have to head out, but I'm looking forward to hearing opening remarks from others as well. So thank you very much. Happy New Year, although it's already February, and looking forward to working together.
Well, thank you, Chair Randolph, and to the co-chairs and members. I want to also express my deep appreciation for your commitment to serving on this advisory body to the board. I know it's not always easy. I know it's a lot of work and perhaps both frustrating at times and somewhat overly bureaucratic. We have certain requirements that we do follow, as the chair mentioned, and we are always trying to strive to be better. Luis, I understand coming in today, you had a bit of a challenge even getting to the room, and I apologize for that. We're always trying to do better. We never want you to feel unwelcome, and especially our VIPs not to feel unwelcome. So thanks for flagging that. We will continue to work on this. We obviously have more to do. And as the chair shared, your role as a body is really important to our agency. You hear from my board, I get this direction that environmental justice and integrating that into the scoping plan and our AB 32 implementation efforts is critical to ensuring those direct benefits to communities. I shared last September at the joint meeting, I think also in this room, that we as an agency continue to prioritize the integration of environmental justice and operationalization of racial equity into all that we do at CARB. Our discussions with EJAC here are an important part of integrating environmental justice, as well as recognizing where more work can be done to ensure that more equitable outcomes are realized by the most overburdened communities. The CARB board adopted the first EJAC charter last year, just about a year ago on March 15, 2023, at a public meeting. And I'm really proud of the way we were able to work together to develop that charter. I know that that took a lot of hard work and a lot of discussions, but you came together to identify the goals and outline the collaborative framework for us to continue working together and for your work as the Environmental Justice Advisory Committee. It also provides accountability and transparency to the work. As we think about the charter, I want to draw attention to how it frames your important role to help integrate environmental justice into our AB 32 implementation efforts here at CARB. As such, we want to work with you to make sure the discussions within EJAC reside within the scope of AB 32 per the statute and the charter. I know there's a lot of interest in efforts to address environmental justice and operationalize racial equity. On our end, we can commit to keeping the EJAC informed of our efforts to address environmental justice and operationalize racial equity. And we'll make sure it's clear how the EJAC and as individual members of the public or nonprofit organizations can engage in these processes. But we also want to make sure that for EJAC discussions, that we keep those conversations as focused as possible on AB 32 and its implementation per that statute and the charter that the board adopted last year. I know that the chair committed to revisiting that charter in 18 months and is also committed to discussing the ongoing operations of EJAC. To demonstrate our commitment to that, we'd like to have some informal check-ins with a subquorum of EJAC members leading up to the joint EJAC CARB board meeting later this year. That'll be an opportunity for us to discuss any clarifications that are needed to help improve the charter, as well as strengthen the foundation of our work. I also want to just note, I'm always open to individual meetings if that's of interest as well. I really encourage and enjoy the opportunity to have discussions either where things are potentially frustrating or where we can find common ground. It's really important for me to support this effort so we can maintain our core values and charge through this AB 32 statute. Given the respective communities that you represent and those that we want to continue to serve, I want to make sure we're collectively prepared with the goal of focusing on desired outcomes and ensuring CARB is responsive to any specific concerns or recommendations from the EJAC. So thank you again. Good morning. Really appreciate your time, and I look forward to working with you. I'm now going to turn it over to the Deputy Executive Officer for Environmental Justice, Chanel Fletcher.
So I just wanted to say thank you, Chair Randolph and Dr. Cliff, for your opening remarks and your commitment to the ongoing EJAC. I've been out on maternity leave for a minute, so if I haven't met you yet, I did want to say that I'm Chanel Fletcher, as Steve already mentioned, Deputy over Equity, Communities, and Environmental Justice. I do want to say a very special thank you to Deldy Reyes, who's sitting right next to me. While I was out on maternity leave, she was the acting deputy over environmental justice, and I just really want to thank you for your leadership and for allowing me to spend time with my newborn baby, who's now 8 months. So I don't know if that's still a newborn, but he's a newborn to me. I also just want to welcome everybody that's in the room, everyone that is on the screen. I do also want to send out an acknowledgement for those who are attending. So I know that we have Board Member Krakoff, Shaheen Takforian, and Rekshafen, who I think are listening at different points. I know that we also have in the room Deputies Edie Chang, Rajinder Sahota, and Edna Murphy. And virtually we have Deputy Annette Hebert, as well as Chief Counsel Ellen Peter. And I also want to acknowledge all the other CARB staff that are listening in to this really important conversation. I think, as everyone has said, this is a very important advisory body. I think that's why we are all here. We want to have this conversation, want to be a part of what we are all kind of collectively do. And so I really do look forward to the discussion today. I will now turn it over to Martha Dina for the next steps.
Good morning. So, I think as stated earlier by the chair and the executive officer, and certainly reflects what we at the EJAC feel that a key part of our job is to make sure that the voices of communities are included into the scoping plan and and its implementation. And I want to remind you that the California legislator called on CARB to ensure that the implementation of AB 32 would not negatively impact already impacted communities. And so we see that as our North Star as we enter into conversations, whether it's the low carbon fuel standard or anything other the regulatory processes. And so I welcome everyone, and this is a hope for a very productive day, and I will hand it over to Catherine.
Thank you, Martha Dina. This is Dr. Catherine, they and she pronouns. Along with wishing everyone a happy new year, also wanted to acknowledge that EJAC has now existed as a permanent body for almost a year, and to honor everyone's presence and the work that we've all collectively put in to carve out this space for environmental justice. It's required the members of the EJAC, it's required CARB to work side by side. The work that we do here requires support from so many inside this room, in the virtual room, and outside of this room. And our item later this afternoon on the low carbon fuel standard is an example of the collective work that we have put in to make space and uplift environmental justice perspectives. We welcome hearing from all, and it is our role to focus on environmental justice. I appreciate the acknowledgement that we are coming up on the update for the charter, and that it has been an enormous amount of work. As a permanent body now looking at rulemaking, we have transitioned to a much different phase than we were in during the scoping plan process, and we need to look for measures that ensure that the work is equitable and sustainable. We had concerns when the charter was adopted around whether the number of members and the terms are sustainable. There are ongoing concerns related to Angel Garcia's resignation about the interpretation of Section Code 8701. We serve as individual members on this body, and yet our organizations are being hit with a lot of extra administrative work because we're being told that there's a conflict of interest. So hopefully those are some things that we're able to resolve in the upcoming process. And as we move into this new year, of course, there's still much work left to be done. The low carbon fuel standard is not finished. The cap and trade rulemaking is ongoing. We're looking towards Senate Bill 905 implementation. So a lot of really important issues. And that's just skimming the surface because there are many more that I could touch on. But for me, I come into this new year with the question for myself, for all EJAC members, and for CARB staff and leadership: how will we show up in this new phase? And continuing to feel the urgency as we not only are, for decades, have been inundated by unhealthy air pollution in the San Joaquin Valley, but we're seeing extreme weather events that are fueled by climate change happen around us every day, which for me leaves me with the feeling that we always need to be moving further, faster, and together as much as possible. Ashley, can you confirm, has Kevin Jefferson joined? Thank you. Okay, so our other co-chair, Kevin Jefferson, unfortunately is ill and not present. So want to honor that as well. It would have been great to have him here for opening comments and for the next item. But with that, I think we're done with opening remarks and we'll move to item number 3.
Madam Chair, before we move, I did want to make a remark ahead of the item number 3. Okay. Thank you, Dr. Cliff, about the concerns that CARB has in regards to providing a better pathway for the public. And I don't consider myself any more privileged than anyone else. We should certainly, the entire Cali PA needs to find ways to both secure and protect the staff, the building, while providing the optimal customer service. I think the building gets a significant amount of resources that it needs to think about. What does that customer service look like? That's not just for business, for private business. In fact, many agencies, local, state, and federal, not all, but many have adopted very high standards for customer service. I also don't want to cast a shadow on this disheartening, disturbing situation that happened to Mr. Jefferson. I did not go through the experience of feeling discriminated. I only went through the experience of having members of the security team not really know what to do with me. But I didn't feel discriminated. I feel that they just didn't know. They generally didn't know. I don't know if there was just a couple of people that were in suits, members of the security team. I didn't see anybody in badges on that desk, and they just didn't know. That was the situation. It wasn't that I actually the one that told them, why don't you just give me a badge? I mean, it's just a public meeting. And they took my advice, gave me a badge, and I came up here, but they just didn't know. So I want to make sure that this gets its own serious attention, and my experience was different, but I went ahead and put forward that recommendation.
Do I just go, Ashley?
Yes, please, Dr. Cliff.
Sorry about that. I just wanted to make sure. I was looking for a cue. Thank you, Luis. I appreciate you, as I mentioned, flagging that. I will note that we tried to increase signage and make sure that those who are checking in are well aware, but we're always going to need to do better. So yes, for all the public, but as I say, especially for those who are volunteering to serve on a body such as this, we want to make sure that you know where to go, that you have the clear path to get there, and that folks, recognize that, and get you here. So thank you for that discussion. So this item, as Luis referenced, is related to an incident that happened last summer. And I shared with this body yesterday a summary, and it's posted online, a summary of the investigation, third-party investigation regarding the incident that co-chair Kevin Jefferson experienced when he approached the security desk here in our Sacramento headquarters on June 2nd. And, as he was asking for help in finding this meeting room. That summary and the transmittal are on the webpage, as I just mentioned. And there's a link in the Zoom chat for those who are also interested in seeing it, included on the slide. And in response to the account provided by co-chair Jefferson during the June 2nd EJAC meeting, the EJAC passed a motion requesting both an investigation and release of a report and a follow-up from me, which I did at that September meeting. Following the incident, we worked really closely with the California Environmental Protection Agency, who oversees the building and who has contracted with a third-party Shaw Law Group to conduct that investigation. Immediately following the incident, CARB updated our in-person meeting protocols in hopes of ensuring that visitors in our building feel welcomed. That includes assigning multiple staff to greet visitors and placing physical signage in the area where meeting room locations are. And on behalf of the CARB leadership and our team, we really deeply regret the incident that occurred. As I shared on September 14 at the joint meeting, I'm committed to ensuring that those engaging with us feel safe coming in the building. That includes, of course, our own staff or any visitors. We are a public building. As Luis mentioned, we get significant resources on behalf of the public, and the public needs to feel safe, welcome, and respected so that we can work together, and that there is no fear of discrimination in any form. And I'm aware that some are going to feel that this summary doesn't fully address the concerns raised at the June 2nd EJAC meeting, but it's important that we protect the confidentiality of those who were involved and as part of that investigation. So I'm going to, with that, just turn it over to the co-chairs to lead a discussion on this item, and I and my team will do our best to answer any questions that you have regarding that. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Cliff. This is Dr. Catherine again. Again, noting that unfortunately Kevin Jefferson isn't present today, which is unfortunate. So I don't want to speak on his behalf, but I do understand that he was interested in knowing whether the changeover in the security was something that was already planned or if it was a result of this incident. If you could speak to that.
Yeah, thank you for raising that. I did try and follow up with Kevin individually, but wasn't able to get a hold of him, and I'm really sorry to hear he's not feeling well. At the end of last year, this building transitioned to state ownership from the prior ownership. And as a result of that, my understanding is that the contract was put out to bid, and per state contracting guidelines, the best bidder was selected for that. So the prior security team is no longer part of security here in the Cali PA building currently, and that that was a result of that transition and the need to put that contract out for bid and follow state contracting processes.
Thank you. So I have one additional question, and then I also want to encourage other EJAC members to either raise their hand in the Zoom or put up their tent card in the room. Thank you, Luis, for modeling that. So in reading over the summary that was provided via email and that was posted, it describes the way that the investigation was conducted, but not necessarily what the results or the outcome of that investigation was, other than acknowledging that the security team has been switched and that there's increased signage. So I just wanted to clarify whether this is kind of the conclusion of that investigation and this is the final report, or if we're expecting additional information.
Yeah, this is the final piece of that. We tried to lay out in detail the process that was followed as part of that investigation, and this is included in that report. The investigator assured those who were being interviewed that confidentiality would be followed. So we can't put out the report and be held true to that. And that's important for any type of investigation of this type. This is similar to like an HR type investigation that we would do internally. And so that information would not be released publicly. Nevertheless, it was important to understand those details and follow up as appropriate on any of those things. And so the two main actions that came out of this was a commitment to de-escalation training for all security professionals going forward, as well as the practices that I mentioned for ensuring there was better signage and that those who are entering the building can do so without feeling unsafe and are going to be correctly directed to where they need to go.
Thank you. So I want to acknowledge Luis has his hand up in the room, and then Kevin Hamilton, we see you on Zoom. We'll come to you next. Go ahead, Luis.
So my got two questions actually. When I read this, it's not exactly clear, and I mean, I'm not sitting in the EJAC. I don't work for government, right? So what I've learned in my career as an advocate, and what I've seen is that government can be very risk averse. And this synopsis looks very risk averse. Now, when I just put myself in a situation where, unfortunately, people of color have to prove themselves more, because it's almost by default that there's going to be doubt and suspicion. And incidents like these, it can serve many positive purposes to be more clear. I think this was created with that risk averse. This is my interpretation. I'm not saying that that's the pathway that CARB shows, but this looks very indicative of, let's run it through all these hands and make sure it's wordsmith it and make, right? So at the end of the day, I can conclude by what I read, something happened. So the concern that Mr. Jefferson brought was validated that there is a concern. But I don't quite read in here, yes, there is an incident that happened. And yes, we were wrong. It's not clear here. And for those, as Mr. Jefferson explained, because I saw, we were all here. And I could see the fear in his eyes. Things could go really wrong in a matter of a split second. I think it's only fair that we just speak in plain language. I think it brings more justice versus, I can go 50-50 here. Something happened, maybe something didn't happen the way that it was written. Because when I read it, it's like, yes, there is a police log. Yes, something happened and the parties are seen in camera. There's nothing conclusive. And I think that it's important. I don't disagree with everything you've said, Dr. Cliff, about protecting those who were interviewed anonymously. But I think the agency can do a better job in just accepting responsibility, whether it was CARB's responsibility or the security responsibility, but accepting as an agency something went wrong and just being more forthcoming with that, because this is extremely the synopsis. There's still, and it might have been inadvertent that the language used, the wordsmithing got to such a point where, I think it could have just been, it's not me that's going to make that decision. You have a victim of that situation. I'm just speaking as somebody as on the outside looking in. I don't know what Mr. Jefferson is looking for. What's his expectation? As somebody on the outside, not having gone through that, a plain language would be straightforward. Yes, we corroborate this incident. I'm not putting words on it. And if it's inconclusive, well, then say that, right? I think this doesn't say that. It just says there's these points and indicators that something happened, but it's not clear. I would hope that if Mr. Jefferson wants a full detailed explanation, minus the protection of those who volunteer information confidentially, I think it would be fair expectation that he be given the longer version of that, on a one-on-one. Whatever Mr. Jefferson thinks is good for him. So that would be my recommendation in my comment.
Thank you for that. And I agree with you that as a standalone document, it doesn't give the full context and picture. Mr. Jefferson's description of the event is a matter of public record, so that was part of the investigation. My response to that was a matter of public record at the September meeting, and then this is just describing that we did go through the full process. Cali PA went through the full process of that investigation, and there was a summary of that, which indicates that the police were called, and that there was, so that effectively corroborates that the situation that he described, where there was the threat of, and that actually did happen, that the law enforcement was called. And as I said in September, we're deeply sorry for that event. I never want that kind of a situation to occur. The questions that Mr. Jefferson indicated, as part of his concern, whether there was discrimination as part of that is part of what the investigator was trying to accomplish in going through the various part of that investigation. What is important from my perspective is that we know that the data and that the actual lived experiences of people of color is that discrimination is a factor in these types of events. So what matters to us is avoiding that in the future, acknowledging that that occurs, using, as you say, this type of an event as a learning experience, and moving forward from there. I really, for a place like CARB, where we are trying to do this type of work, integrating racial equity into everything that we do, and to have an incident like that occur on our watch, on my watch, was really upsetting. And I acknowledge that, and I fully acknowledge that that occurred. So I agree with you. We're trying to be clear and transparent and accountable, and hold true to what EJAC requested of us, and but also ensure that we're holding true to the parts of our requirements to not disclose that confidential information, or to ensure the privacy of those who have been interviewed as part of this. So I'm sorry that it isn't more clear. I think that the investigator went through a really thorough process and tried to piece together the various parts of that. But it's not in dispute that that security did say we should call the police, and that in fact the police were called. So that is part of the finding of that investigation.
And Dr. Cliff, I don't want to underplay what happened this morning as I was coming in. This situation that happened to Mr. Jefferson is I would say it's when you're in the worst case scenarios, right? They could always get worse, but it's like air quality. Like, why does maroon matter when you're in red already? Right? Saying this situation, this is the worst case. That needs to be the red flag right there. You don't need to wait till it gets to the next level. Again, separate from this, because Mr. Jefferson has, and I want to respect his opinions, his expectations from CARB. Separately, I'm very fortunate that calling the police wasn't the solution for me. And those members of the security team weren't unpolite. They just didn't know. They pointed to an empty desk, which I think I think that's where CARB was sitting, maybe perhaps at 11 o'clock. So you just didn't know where to go from there. But there were empty chairs there. There was an empty table there. But I also want to say that it's not a CARB problem, separate from this. From the bigger picture, it's a Cali EPA problem. And it might even be a California government problem. How many buildings have the same scenarios and situations? But let's make it manageable. This is not a CARB building. It's a Cali EPA building with boards, departments, and offices, right? So as a sort of positive advice, trying to put something here in your consideration of the entire Cali EPA and boards, departments, and offices. I recommend there be a meeting and figure out how can you maintain an open government, assure that there is some of the recommendations that are already being made, but I think it needs to be more than CARB. It's a Cali PA building. So I think you should, my recommendation is you may want to seek, if you haven't already, have a table with everyone in it and figure out what is a plan to assure this doesn't happen. Because I mean, the worst thing that could happen is that it happens again, as you're trying to say, you know, we're addressing it and then it happens. I mean, good thing, you know, police wasn't the solution for me, you know, but it could have been for somebody else. Yeah. So thank you for considering my recommendations.
Yeah, thank you. And I agree. I'm glad police weren't a part of your interaction. I will just say, and I appreciate the suggestion, and I will take that back, and we will have follow up with Cali PA. But in this case, you know, we are striving to ensure that those who are coming to a meeting that we're hosting are know where to go and are, you know, able to get into the building and get to the room safely. So that is follow up, you know, that CARB can take, and that is that's a CARB action. So I don't disagree, and I appreciate you saying this is, you know, broader than CARB, but, you know, let's be clear, like in this case, you know, CARB needs to make sure that when Luis Olmedo comes in the building, that like he can get his badge and get to the room. You know, that's an action that we can take, and we'll make that happen.
Thank you, Luis and Dr. Cliff. I want to encourage any other EJAC members who would like to comment. We are just a few minutes away from the lunch break, so please get yourself in the queue. Go ahead, Kevin Hamilton.
Hi, and good afternoon. Thank you for your reply, Dr. Cliff, and I certainly agree with my colleagues' comments. You had mentioned, and I'm pleased to hear, that you're having anyone who works those front desks be trained in what we call mental health first aid with this de-escalation training. I would also recommend that you have these folks all go through a training in cultural sensitivity, confidence, and humility. If you don't have a module for it, we created one for DHCS under contract about 6 years ago, and I'm happy to share that with you. And that is critical, that people understand. And cultural humility is all about the fact that we need to understand that we come from different cultures. That means we don't know everything you know, and you don't know everything I know, but we can learn from each other, and we should be learning from each other in those moments, moment to moment. And if we allow something like this to start to escalate and happen, no one learns anything from anybody except what they don't like. So, and it just reinforces those kinds of feelings. So I would really recommend that you make that mandatory for these folks as well. The last thing I wanted to comment, and I had originally had asked for, is an explanation of how your existing policy for the front area, which I'm sure you have one, for the building had been amended to solve this problem. And so the addition of this training, I assume, is one of those pieces. Are there others that have been substantively changed in your building entry policies and procedures?
Well, thank you for the suggestion about the cultural sensitivity and humility training. I know that we're interested in that. We'll be following up, so you will certainly get a call from us. Regarding the policy changes, as I mentioned, for public meetings, we're including signage so that there's better pathfinding signage so that people know where to go. And this morning we included signage that showed where the room is, so that I saw those when I was coming in, because I actually didn't know what room I was supposed to go to, despite the fact that it's on my calendar. I needed that, so I appreciate having that. I think that every time we're going to learn a little bit more about that. We also are, as I mentioned, having the staff who are available downstairs to welcome those coming in. And that's something that, we need to follow up on based on the experience that Luis mentioned. Those are the main things in terms of the training that we discussed. That will ultimately be part of requirements for security. I believe that the contract that went out may not have included all that information in it because of the timing of the contract, but as I mentioned, Cali PA is committed to including the de-escalation, and I think you called it mental health first aid. It's a term I've never heard before, but I appreciate that as a follow-up and as a commitment going forward. So those are the main actions that change as a result.
Okay, so it sounds like a good, you're making a good faith effort, but there's an old saying, if it's not in writing, it's not done. So it's, if there's not some kind of a written direction document, step by step, here's what you do, or here's what has to happen there, then what happens when you're not there? I mean, you're there now, but how long will you be there? Hopefully for a good long while, but who knows?
What do you know?
And you want to leave this for posterity, not just for the moment. So I just think it's important to get these things down into, if you will, a charter-like document that allows that to ensures that it will continue and that there's no backsliding on this just because a new person comes in. Just throwing that out there. I don't want to take up any more. Yeah, I don't want to take up any more time here. But
it's frightening me that you're driving while you're on the meeting. By the way,
I'm going into the parking structure right now.
Okay, fair enough. But I appreciate that suggestion, and actually, we are planning to include written documentation going forward, so that will be part of any of these meetings, and that'll be documented. So, great suggestion.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Cliff. And I don't see any other hand raised, so I think we will. Oh, sorry, Tom, go ahead.
Thanks. I'll try to make it quick. 2 questions. I have some experience in law enforcement investigations. I was on the City of Modesto's committee that recommended getting a civilian review board and an independent auditor. So I'm thinking of the question as far as this investigation, is this considered a public investigation, which would be like, for example, if I put in a public records request, would I get a copy of, redacted version of more of the investigation's documents than we were given in the summary? And if that is the case, I'm wondering why it just wasn't, made available. If it is a public document that the public would have a right to see, even with the redactions of names and stuff. And one other quick question, because of experience that I've seen with problematic officers that go from one department to another. Is there any possibility that a new security company would even be hiring the same security guards that might, still come to work for that company? Is there any, has anybody looked into that? Is that even a possibility? So those are my 2 questions.
Thank you. Regarding the first question, would this be considered a public record? Like any personnel type investigation, those would be protected under the PRA, as I understand it. Again, I should just say I'm not an attorney, so I can't speak definitively on that. But that's, typically those types of investigations that are personnel related are not released under PRA. To the second question, I really can't speculate I guess if I were to speculate, that the same guards could be hired by a different company. And so I don't think there would be anything prohibiting that. What I'm most concerned about is ensuring that as a matter of follow-up, that anybody who is working in the building is trained appropriately, and that we avoid that type of situation completely upfront by having those who are coming to the building know exactly where to go and not have problems where they aren't feeling welcomed. And so, it concerns me that Luis's experience this morning.
I can't hear anything for some reason when I got out of my car. I'll be in there in a minute.
Was contrary to that. And so, we have more to do. That's clear.
Thank you, Tom. I didn't see you in the corner there, so thanks for calling that out. So now, seeing no raised hands from any EJAC members online or in the room. Oh. Okay. So one thing that I am going to layer on as a request, an acknowledgement that Kevin Jefferson isn't here today. I would defer to him how he would like to follow up, whether that's at a future public EJAC meeting or with a subquorum conversation. I don't want to predetermine that, but I would like to leave that on the table in recognition that the person that was involved in the matter in the investigation isn't here to be able to speak to it. Go ahead, Luis, and then we'll close it out, and I'll pass it back to Ashley.
So just real quick, and Dr. Cliff, you don't have to answer this question, and I appreciate your acknowledgement that you're not an attorney. When there is a personnel problem as an employer, you address it through the personnel channels. This was both a personnel and a public matter. So I would ask that perhaps consult legal. If this incident would have ended up in the worst possible situation, get the media involved, get the police involved, carrying the body out, is that a personnel matter? I think it would probably be fair, given that you don't know, and that maybe this is a good question, probably educational for us. Is it 100% a personnel matter? It involved a member of the public. So if it was treated only as a personnel problem, then I worry that the public part of it may have been left out. I'm not saying that that's the case. It just opens that question. So I don't expect an answer. I just, we're in a space here. I'm not an attorney.
Sure.
You mentioned you're not an attorney.
I am not.
But I think it would be fair to get that answer.
And thank you for that. Without necessarily addressing that point directly, what I will say is that Mr. Jefferson's account is a matter of public record, and we're not trying to discount that at all. My point about the investigation is that it involves both employees that were contracted at the time by the building as well as CARB employees, is a personnel matter. And so any follow-up is, part of our own internal process. And that's why.
And I understand that how you address an employee after the situation, but you have a public situation here, how you handle the employee is there's two different things going on here. And I feel like they're being convoluted here. You have a personnel and a public situation. So I understand 100% as an employer, the personnel matter, but you also have a public matter here. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I would like to close out item 3 by saying a huge thank you to Dr. Cliff for taking the time, and to the EJAC members for your comments as well. We will at this time be taking a lunch break. We will be back at 1:40. I just wanted to acknowledge that we went just a little bit over time, so I want to give folks enough time to have their lunch. So please make sure you are back at 1:40. We do need quorum. to start back again this afternoon. So really appreciate the timeliness. Thank you all. See you at 1:40. Martha, Dina, I just wanted to confirm that you are on the line and ready to go. We are at quorum.
I am.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much.
Yes.
So maybe just a reminder for those folks who are online, I see that you're starting to raise your hand. Thank you so much for doing that and getting in queue. I'll provide another reminder later, but just for folks who are planners like me, we will be doing kind of a last call for comments around 3:45, 4 o'clock. So please get in queue and then we will call your name accordingly. Really appreciate it. So Martha, Dina, I think I will pass it off to you then at this point, right?
We're doing public comments, right? Or do we not have any
No.
for this section?
Discussion first, and then we will move to public comment.
Okay. So we want to queue up the conversation around the low carbon fuel standard. We have a couple things. We are really going to discuss where we are in terms of the resolution, but also I would like to resubmit our scoping plan comments because there was so much about the low carbon fuel standard in that comment. And my understanding is that those comments won't be considered, those that we did for the scoping plan. And so I'd like some clarification. Do we just resubmit them as part of public comment to make sure that it's within the 45-day period? And then I really, want to hand it over to Catherine and the other EJAC members to talk. We're going to talk about each item within our resolution to see where we are and what answers we can get to some key questions.
Thank you, Martha. Dina, before I take over, did you also quickly want to mention the Earth Justice letter?
Yes, and that all of you should have received a letter from staff, all the EJAC members, with comments from Earth Justice that reflect many of the comments that we have been making for some time. And we want to also submit those as part of our record. And some key concerns are also the key concerns we've had throughout this process, that the time allotted is not sufficient, that I don't know that the concerns that have been raised both by EJAC and many other environmental justice advocates who've come before the board and the EJAC have not been fully answered in terms of how the low carbon fuel standard is going to be strengthened to reflect the needs of the people living closest to those facilities.
Thank you, Martha. Dina. This is Dr. Catherine. So also to underscore from the Earth Justice letter, so I think that was circulated to EJAC members. Has it also been posted online? Okay, so it will be posted online for people to be able to look at later. I want to make sure that we are explicitly uplifting the ask for, if this item goes before the Air Resources Board in March, that it be approached as a non-voting item and to postpone the vote at least until July, because there is definitely a lot to consider and a lot of implications regarding the low carbon fuel standard. So as I mentioned this morning, we are just under a year into being a permanent body. And when we started meeting, we had a lot to work out just in terms of internal housekeeping and logistics. So I think, frankly, some folks were pretty surprised that we agreed to take on the low carbon fuel standard. But at least for the work that I do in the San Joaquin Valley, as an asthmatic, I definitely understood the significance of the low carbon fuel standard and the implications that it has for our communities, not just for the climate, but also for our incredibly severe air pollution problems. So this is a really important rule and program. And unfortunately, I think on both process and substance, we've progressed from bad to worse in terms of what came out in the Independent Statement of Reasons, or the ISOR, as it will be referred to over and over again for people not familiar with the jargon. The ISOR presents a significantly different scenario than was previously indicated in the SRIA, which is the something that I'm not going to remember right now, but somebody will help me later. Staff, anybody, SRIA?
Sure. Statement of regulatory impact assessment or standardized regulatory impact assessment. Sorry.
There you go. In September of 2023, the Environmental Justice Advisory Committee, or EJAC, had the opportunity to meet with the CARB board in our annual joint meeting, and we opened a productive dialogue and asked a range of questions that have not been directly responded to, including the 8-point resolution that we will segue to in a couple of minutes. It's not clear yet when the item will be heard by the board, but at this point, there's no agreement to holding an additional meeting with the decision makers of CARB before the final vote, and we find that hugely concerning. We also requested today that staff present to us, because the eyesore is a very detailed and complex document that not all of us have the opportunity to read through. And even if we do, again, it's laden with a lot of technical language that it's helpful to clarify on. But we were told that because CARB is in the 45-day public comment period, that's not possible. So we're also not clear on what types of questions we can ask that'll be responded to. We do want to make space for that, and we'll hear from staff what they're able to speak to and what they are not. But again, as EJAC members that have full-time jobs, some of us multiple jobs, and a lot of other responsibilities, it's not fair to expect us to be able to review the entire document ourselves in a short time frame and find where the responses to our 8-point resolution are. Furthermore, there's a section that discusses environmental justice in the eyesore that talks about that the environmental justice community should be in support of the regulation, while overall what is in there is actually tailored to industry. So I know we'll have a range of speakers today, and I would really like to hear from industry what they actually don't like about this regulation. So in terms of the proposed regulation in the eyesore, there is a heavy-handed analysis of the environmental justice scenario that a coalition of groups put together and recommended that implies that it's too costly. And we will have speakers in the public comment section who are more expert and will be able to speak to that. Again, from an air quality perspective, also really concerned about the lack of modeling regarding air pollution impacts and what the potential impact is of increased stringency of the program. Also very concerned that there will be pass-through costs that will disproportionately impact low-income households that are not able to afford electric vehicles or may live in areas like rural parts of the San Joaquin Valley where there is not adequate charging infrastructure to get them into electric vehicles. So if staff could please pull up the resolution at this point, what we're going to do for the next several minutes is we're going to underscore and repeat the things that we asked for in our 8-point resolution, and we've kind of divvied this up amongst ourselves. So thank you to the carbon markets work group members who have met with me multiple times over the last couple of weeks to try to get prepared for today's discussion. So first, for resolution items 1 and 2, I'm going to pass it to Kevin Hamilton.
There's the little green light. So for Resolution 1, which is conduct and incorporate a full life cycle assessment of all air pollution and greenhouse gas emissions for all pathways and their implications for environmental justice communities. As we work through the eyesore, which is a project in this case, since the document was delivered near the end of December and fell right into the middle of the holidays, and then of course the rush at the beginning of January, has not really left us much time to analyze this document in full. I believe it's 146 pages. However, the EJ sector in this particular document gives us virtually no help or advice or response to this at all. I do not see any life cycle assessment that is complete for all the pathways. I see new pathways being proposed. I see an opportunity for others to jump into the program. And in fact, it appears that staff are directly sending a signal that as long as they enroll in this program before 2030, that their investments will be safe for at least 30 years. And so it looks like on its face that we're bringing more people in. It's on page 16, by the way. It'll be more people coming into the program, which we really don't need. We want to shrink this program, right?
It's oversubscribed already. And we're somehow sending a signal to the market here that, hey, make your investments now. They're safe for the next 30 years as long as you meet this threshold and this timeline. And we've been specifically told that that's not the purpose of CARB's work. The markets will do what they will. CARB's work and the LCFS is focused at reducing our reliance on combustion energy. So while it appears that 30 years out on 2030 would bring us to 2060, which extend us beyond 10 years beyond the furthest goal that either federal or state government has set for reaching carbon neutrality, and beyond the goal of CARB to fully electrify its truck and light duty vehicle fleet. So we have real concerns about this. It doesn't make sense to us. One of the solutions that have been put forward in the EJAC, in the EJ section, is the ISO recommends CARB increase incentives for LIDACs and others for the next generation. Yet the reality is that neither CARB nor any California agency can guarantee budget funding without specific legislation and approval by the latest governor. Considering the last two state budget cycles, dependence on that strategy in any evaluation is at best unreliable. At worst, shouldn't be considered at all. At the same time, staff are attempting to somehow put that forward as a panacea for the fact that as we move 10 years out in this program, and again, according to SREA, we're going to see an increase in gasoline prices by over $1 a gallon. And yet, by this same document, it infers that the people who will own the EVs will definitely be people who can afford to buy them, and those who won't will continue to drive gasoline vehicles. So quite obviously, you can infer from that, since this thing is full of assumptions anyway, I'll make the assumption that the burden of this is going to fall on, and again, the SREA calls this out, disadvantaged and low-income community residents who can least afford it, who will also be suffering from the increased cost of energy for electricity for their own homes, let alone gasoline at the pump. So this doesn't make any sense to me. It makes no sense from an environmental justice perspective, and it doesn't pass the smell test under any reasonable person's look at this. So the old reasonable standard. So moving on to conduct a full accounting of GHGs and air pollution emissions associated with pathways relying on production of fuel from livestock and dairy manure. I prefer to just think of it as livestock generally. We happen to have a lot of dairies in the valley, but this is actually much bigger than that when it comes to this particular biofuel source. So to date, we have no serious documentation of the methane emissions of the entire operation from start to finish. This particular tool continues to focus only on the end point of the production of the gas rather than its entire life cycle. Now, we can argue as to whether or not it matters for the program, but just because of good science and doing a good job to be transparent, that information should be available so that everybody in the public and who's elected to represent their communities can take a look at it and objectively evaluate it and make decisions based on all the data rather than this sort of carved out piece. So it appears, and again, in consulting with my friend Sebastian Berod from LBNL, who's working with us on our summation methane project down in Kern, and the other members of that team who are attempting to do measurements of methane from dairies by trying to find the downwind location on a given day because no one will let us on one, which seems ludicrous on its face as well. They feel that there's been nothing done to correct the egregious error in these CI calculations by limiting the data pool in the animal waste sector to only the production and not the supply side of the operation. A true application of what I would consider, and many, junk science, that any credible peer review process would condemn as inadequately supporting its conclusions simply because it was already there. So while that argument might hold some water if whatever is there was natural and fixed, concentrated livestock facilities are neither. They are rapidly growing and evolving in direct congress with the fuel production operations. Their impact has to be considered in order to posit a final conclusion specific to its outputs. This in turn has resulted in a lack of public confidence in CARB's conclusion, because the critical question at the beginning, does this make sense, with regard to excluding that data, does not make sense to any reasonable person. So, and in a statement that the LCFS supports carbon capture and sequestration is equally concerning. The LCFS also supports the use of carbon capture and sequestration in connection with transportation fuel production and direct air capture with carbon sequestration projects. These capital-intensive projects are also supported by the federal government through 45Q tax credits for CCS. That's quote from the actual document on page 16 again. This technology is still in its infancy and unproven as an actual solution for our climate emission problems. The only true solution is to reduce or eliminate the amount of carbon we emit. Continued investments that use terms like carbon neutral and reduced carbon intensity imply that carbon emissions growth can continue as long as we have the technology to eliminate or reduce anything newly emitted. We know that in fact our existing atmospheric carbon inventory has and continues to create one climate disaster after another. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Kevin. So just connecting that last point to resolution item number 7, which Juan will also speak to in a moment. So
sorry, I couldn't read.
No, you're totally fine. I just want to make sure we're helping connect the dots for folks that haven't been as immersed in this as we have as the EJAC over the last few months. So next I'm going to take on items 3, 4, and 5. I'm going to do 3 and 4 first, and then 5. Then I'll be passing to Juan for 6 and 7, and then back to Martha Dina for 8. And we'll both make some wrap-up comments. So resolution item 3 says eliminate avoided methane credits effective January 1st, 2024. Number 4 says eliminate credit generation for pathways relying on the production of fuel from livestock and dairy manure for emissions reductions that otherwise would have occurred or were legally or contractually required to occur. So this section of the document has confusing and tricky details that people who are experts and have worked on this for much longer than me shared that they had to read over and over again to really understand what is written in there, and that what is provided before us today differs significantly from what was previously proposed by staff. There's been a history in the program of double counting benefits across multiple programs that provide incentives for things like dairy digesters. And where at first pass, the implication is that crediting is phased out by 2040 for projects or 2045 if projects are associated with hydrogen production. In fact, projects constructed before 2030 get up to 3 10-year periods of crediting, and projects used to power electric vehicles get up to 3 10-year periods of crediting and can choose whatever start date, which would allow for crediting through at least 2060, as Kevin mentioned a minute ago. We also have not seen any movement from staff to initiate rulemaking on emissions from dairies pursuant to SB 1383. So while that's not an explicit part of our resolution, it is an interconnected and complementary piece to what we're asking for in items 3 and 4 that, again, I want to reiterate and get on the record. Shifting now to item number 5, in the resolution, cap the use of lipid biofuels at 2020 levels, pending an updated risk assessment to determine phase out timelines for high risk crop-based feedstocks. We are producing biofuels at a rate that's not sustainable, which has serious implications for indirect land use changes that need to be more adequately modeled, especially because we're seeing foreign grown soy crop pathways being approved for massive biorefinery projects, which will impact communities on the front lines of these refineries. The Air Resources Board should also take the health benefits of biofuels that are asserted in the ISOR with a great deal of uncertainty, because the ISOR relies on a 2011 study instead of the more recent study prepared for CARB in 2021. The air quality benefits documented in the older study are not found in the more recent study, which examines air quality benefits from the new diesel technology in engines that California now requires. With that, I'm going to pass it over to Juan Flores for items 6 and 7.
Thank you, Dr. Catherine, and thank you, everyone. This is Juan Flores. I'm on the Zoom meeting. On his opening remarks, Dr. Cliff noted how bureaucracy sometimes has halted or make it even more hard to do our job as EJAC members. I might probably want to go a little bit further and say that bureaucracy had seemed to be the mission of some of CARB staff, that instead of moving for the welfare of community members and those communities more affected, they try to create roadblocks in order for them to able just to live in healthier places. So that's why on number 6 and 7, we're making a very direct ask. One is to prohibit, number 6, prohibit enhanced oil recovery as an eligible sequestration method. Community members have been clear. This is the new fracking. This idea of using sequestration methods to enhance oil recovery goes against everything that the state of California has been fighting for the past decade, which is that of moving away from fossil fuels into a just transition of renewable energies. We're only trying to keep alive a zombie that is dying, an industry that has harmed our communities, and we shouldn't allow that. And I really hope that CARB staff makes it very clear on the LCFS that this is not the way to move forward. Number 7, we are also asking to do not issue LCFS credits for carbon removal projects such as direct air capture. Again, by doing this, are those communities that are most affected, the ones that are being left behind, the ones that are less thought of, in the name of some staff members could claim in the name of the economy. There isn't much that you can do with money without people. And if you're killing our communities, we can do as much as we can do for the economy, but it's not going to mean anything. And I'll leave it at that, and I'll pass it back to you, Dr. Catherine.
Thank you, Juan. And I'm actually going to pass it to Co-Chair Martha Dina to talk about resolution item 8 and make some overarching comments. And as we segue, also, again, want to invite other EJAC members, if you have comments that you would like to add, to go ahead and put up your tent card or raise your hand in the Zoom room. Over to you, Martha Dina.
And I was hoping not to get muted. So on number 8, the inclusion of aviation fuels, we recommend that we move up the timeline for interstate jet fuel from 2028 to 2026. We also think that given the very narrow approach that's presented in the proposed regs, that we have a 2-year review on the proposed approach to jet fuel so that we can not get stuck for too long and not including all of aviation fuels. And again, I want to reiterate the need for an expanded timeline, as repeating as what Kevin said. Board members have not had a full opportunity to understand these. Many of the board members are new and have not been around for other discussions related to the low carbon fuel standard. And I don't know that we've given them collectively between CARB and EJAC, well, I think EJAC has the tools that they need to actually make a decision based on protecting public health and reducing emissions and setting some clear signals that this approach that continues to incentivize larger herd size, that continues to put communities at risk, is not the approach. And so we very much need this extra time for board members to fully understand, and also to give the opportunity for us to hear from staff how they're approaching the recommendations that the EJAC has been making, both here and through the scoping plan. And with that, I'll hand it over to Catherine and see if there's other questions from EJAC members.
Thank you, Martha Dina. Also, just a quick process check for folks that are in the audience that are public commenters. Please do raise your hand so that we can put you in the queue. So in the room, I see Luis, you have your tent card up. Luis, go ahead.
So I'm not gonna repeat what's already been said. I just want to provide you more of sort of a personal experience. How many of you live next to an airport? I mean, like neighbors to an airport? In the table? No. How many of you live near a military base? Within a mile away? Within a mile away? Oh, yeah. Yeah, okay. How many of you enjoy the Blue Angels? Do you know what the Blue Angels, everybody knows what they are? Okay, it's these, they do all kinds of aerial acrobats, very sophisticated, very accurate. Our whole community enjoys it. So they spend the fall with us. And interestingly enough, we have enormous amounts of desert if you go from south to north. Right? You're not careful, you fly into Mexico. I don't know if there's any control whether there's a border or not, maybe not, but there's plenty of desert. But for whatever reason, these aircrafts, helicopters, these aerial acrobats, they all continue to fly over my house. So if I was on Zoom, you might hear that thundering sound. And so around the neighborhood and in the schools that are in the neighborhood where I live, because we're in the pathway, my nose isn't that sensitive, but apparently everybody else's nose is, and they complain of headaches. They can't stand the smell of jet fuel because they're got two neighbors, got the military base and we got the municipal airport. And just one thing that I can't get off my mind is I imagine this program at some point is going to sunset. I don't know if it has a deadline, but I think it would be better. It would be a better fit. Now, I'm not coming in this fully educated on all the intricacies of the low carbon fuel standard, but I was just thinking, wouldn't it be better if it was a no carbon fuel standard, instead of the low carbon fuel standard? So I agree with the fact that these programs should begin to transition as much as we are transition under the Governor Gavin Newsom, under this legislature, under the current administration that said, we didn't go near zero emissions vehicles after 2035. It says we didn't say almost zero emissions. We went zero emission vehicles will be sold in California beyond 2035. So yeah, I think it's great to hear all the, I think we're helping you sort of go from the low carbon to the no carbon. But I think maybe there's a sort of a transitional phase that needs to exist here. And from what I'm hearing, I think that's kind of the direction of why these recommendations are happening, but that's it. That's the personal story. I hope that these jet fuels go away soon, because it's or find different airspace. I mean, there's still going to be climate pollutants, but at least they shouldn't be flying over our neighborhoods,
Thank you, Luis. So we still have a few more minutes to discuss this item as EJAC members. If there are any other EJAC members that want to comment, please raise your hand or put your tent card up. Again, people in the public, if you would like to comment, please raise your hand. Sharifa, go ahead.
Sorry, I was struggling to unmute for a moment. I guess I'll come on camera too. Why not? Yeah, so I guess what I wanted to say about this as I was listening to everyone was just the fact that as we made these statements, because I know these are from last year, is that what I feel like needs to be heard is that you can't continue to invest in things that aren't working, that are prolonging technologies that continue to harm our communities. And I feel like that's the essence of what I'm hearing. I really appreciate what you just said, Louise, about like, having like a no carbon fuel standard, as well as thinking about that concept within this rulemaking process. And so I remember when I was co-chair of the committee saying, like once we invest in things like carbon capture and similar technology, we're not going to want to abandon the assets, right? And so that's something we have to keep in mind, is like as we're doing the rulemaking, is don't invest in something that you won't want to abandon as you're creating a transitionary plan to something else. Or as you're thinking of the final plan, or as you're thinking of like, we've seen evidence that something doesn't work because it's not worked in the interim, like for the few examples of it that exist now, don't do something that doesn't work, right? And so, yeah, I guess keeping like the successes of a technology and the failures, because there have been those, in mind is what's very pertinent to me as we're thinking about this. And so I'm hoping that CARB is listening with listening ears and not just taking notes, but actually absorbing what's being said, what's been said, and what's written down, so that people's lives are actually changing, and it's not just like collecting something else to be put in the administrative record. And so that's all I have to say, I guess, about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharifa. In the room, Tom, I see your tent card. Go ahead.
Yeah, kind of going off of Luis's personal story about the jet fuel. I was going to bring up something about the biojet fuel that they want to make in my community in Stanislaus County. And one of the points I was going to make is that I understand that replacing jet fuel with biojet fuel, that there's benefits to that. But the point that I was going to make is that in that community where they want to make it, nobody's taking a jet anywhere. So it's benefiting somewhere else. And the point I wanted to make about that is, when we started this process and I, applied for the EJAC and was explained, what it was about, I remember specifically the explanation being, we want to fight climate change, but we need the environmental justice perspective to make sure we're not repeating the bad of the past in sacrificing certain communities with the pollution to do other things that we might see as progress. And I can tell you on the ground in my community, that's exactly what's happening. I understand, for lack of a better term, going green, fighting climate change. So this is what it looks like in my community, where, like I said, we want to fight climate change, but not do the same old things. So there's a facility. And I've said this before, so I'll try to make it maybe a little more brief this time, but just for folks that haven't heard it. It's a facility. It's an old ammunition plant, a Superfund site. There's a whole legacy of contamination that goes with that. Kids, getting leukemia from the drinking water around the area years ago. And recently, with I think in good faith, local folks wanted to bring what they've referred to as a green business to the area. So the initial promise was that somebody was going to come in and make these biofuels out of the ag waste that folks are looking to do something with. That was the original plan. So they were not only given a space at this ammo plant, but made the manager of the ammo plant. So they get to decide who else gets to be a tenant there, and what's done with the property and that kind of stuff. Recently, they made the announcement that using the local ag waste is not going to work out for whatever reason. It's too hard, it's too complicated, it's going to be too expensive. So after they're already kind of in the door, they say we're not going to be using local ag waste. We're going to have to be trucking in or bringing in by train animal fats, plant oils, tallow, other things like that being trucked in. And this went up against to the local planning commission who rejected it, who voted it down. And they cited their main concerns were traffic and air quality, that this project would bring in at least 86 tanker trucks every day, added tanker trucks every day to the roads, that they, quoting one planning commissioner, if you know the streets there, that Clarabelle between Terminal and Roselle is a parking lot half the time. And this project wants to put 86 more trucks in the road right there. Now, this is all, subsidies, government money, LCSF credits, all the programs that we're talking about. That's, keeping this company alive and allowing them to do this. So in the name of going green for climate, and like I said, understandably replacing that jet fuel with biojet fuel, not gonna really benefit us. Hope it benefits Luis's community. But the bottom line is this project is going to increase air pollution in that area. A project that's coming in the name of going green, fighting climate change, sacrificing my community. Once again, same old pattern, so that we can do this. This project is now going up to the Air District for a permit. The Cal Enviro screen census tract that this facility is in is a 95 percentile pollution burden census tract. So you have this program that is helping site a facility that will bring more air pollution for the trucks and the facility itself in a 95 percentile pollution burden community. The census tract right across the street is the one that I live in. It's a little better. It's only 88 percentile pollution burden, according to Cal Enviro screen. This is a 70% Latino community, about 75% people of color live there. Like I said, this is a place with a legacy of being dumped on with the ammunition plant. Since then, the ammunition plants had other tenants that do, oil and hazardous waste transfer site, been cited by DTSC for violating regulations. I even know somebody from the community who used to work there a long time ago who told me stories about how they used to just go, dump oil out in the corner of the fields. And so that's what we're doing again. In the name of progress, in the name of fighting climate change, which I think everybody's in agreement of doing, we're giving money so that companies can open up facilities that will add pollution to places with the 95 in the 95th percentile in Cal Enviro screen for pollution burden. It kind of makes me think, what am I doing all this for? What am I supposed to tell community members that I've told, I deal with the state, I go to these meetings, I try to tell them this kind of stuff. And, I have a feeling that they're just kind of looking when this place gets permitted and these trucks are coming in and out, they're going to be like, oh, I thought you were doing something about this. And I honestly don't know what to tell them. I just wanted to make sure that I got everything. This is the same place. I'll just say that also wants to that currently has an exploratory permit to look if the site can also be used to put carbon in the ground. Right down the road from brand new neighborhood full of houses that they just built, and the people that bought those houses that are all finding this out now are not too happy that they weren't told about these facilities right down the street from where they just got a new house. From what I was told when I asked about concerns about carbon pipelines, is that the carbon is all going to be trucked in too. If this goes forward, it's not as of yet, but they're definitely trying. So this is a bunch of money that taxpayer money that our government is giving through these programs in the name of going green and fighting climate change, that are increasing pollution in disadvantaged environmental justice communities with legacies of pollution, because we already have those polluting plants and sites, and it's just easier and cheaper to just put something new there instead of finding a wealthier neighborhood somewhere else to build new stuff. And I've had that conversations about someone, well, don't you see the advantages of doing, that's great. Yeah, I see the advantages. Let's find another place to put this stuff. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. So at this point, we've heard comments from all of the EJAC members in the room. So I'm going to put out a last call for any of the EJAC members on Zoom or anyone on the room who wants to add anything. I also do want to ask, because we have Matt Botil here from Industrial Strategies Division in the room, and please excuse in advance because I was very sick a few weeks ago. I was not able to make any of the prep calls. So I understood the feedback that because of the 45-day comment period that staff was not available to present, but I'm still not clear on what types of questions you can answer. So I'm just going to ask if you can tell us where we can find direct responses to these resolution items, just to start to try to test out what types of questions you might be able to answer for us.
Thanks. Yeah, that's getting some feedback there. Matt Botil, Division Chief for the Industrial Strategy Division here at CARB. And so I am here to clarify any aspects of the staff proposal that we released in December. So if there's questions, I can help clarify those. Any comments or requests for changes on the staff proposal do need to go into the 45-day docket for us to be able to consider those, and as part of the rulemaking process. And so I am happy to talk real quickly about what we put into the staff proposal with respect to the Environmental Justice Advisory Committee's resolution. I understand it's a lengthy document. Kevin was right, 146 pages. I don't know if he was spying my screen because it's up right now, but so we did an analysis of the items requested in the Environmental Justice Advisory Committee's resolution for what that would mean in terms of greenhouse gas emission reductions, air quality benefits and impacts and costs. That is on page 115 in the staff report, so in the ISOR. There's also a description in the staff report of updates that we were proposing as part of the 45-day package to address many of the environmental justice priorities that have been raised to us, both through the scoping plan process and then various public comments. We did hold community meetings last year on the low carbon fuel standards, and some of that information is, I think, on page 62, 64 of the staff report. So hopefully that will help focus some of your reading on the staff report. There were a couple of other things that I heard too that I'd like to clarify, but before I do so, I'll hand it back to Dr. Catherine, and if you want to keep going through comments, then I can clarify those at the end.
Yeah, I mean, I think actually because we've already kind of laid out stuff and we're for the most part reiterating things we've already asked, I'm definitely interested in hearing your responses. I also just quickly wanted to note some folks on the Zoom are just asking if you can speak a little bit more slowly.
Thanks for the reminder.
So Kevin, did you have a direct question or do you want to hear Matt's responses? Yeah, okay. So Kevin's going to add a question and then we'll go back to Matt. And of course, any other EJAC members who have questions, please raise your hand.
And this is in response to Tom's concern. My question is, where in the ISOR does it
create an incentive for an entity like this one who is looking at changing out an existing source with a cleaner source to instead ensure that they're not just coming into the program because there's money in the program, versus if these are, and I don't know what class these trucks are, but if they're Class A trucks, for instance, there's plenty of production of Class 8 trucks at this point. So, and again, they're planning ahead, I'm assuming not in 1 year, but over a number of years. So is there some kind of a means test where they have to show that there is not another alternative that is electric, where that they could use that and should use that versus setting up themselves in the LCFS program with this combustible fuel? Was that clear enough? I know it was a little muddy, but you're a smart guy, man.
So if the question is around requirements within the LCFS, as you know, is a regulation focused on reducing the carbon intensity of fuels. It does not place individual requirements on individual facilities with respect to the composition of its trucking fleet, for instance, or its criteria of pollutant emissions. Those are the responsibility of other regulatory and permitting processes, but that's not contained within the low carbon fuel standard. Anything else to?
Yeah, I was speaking more to the is that project adding to our knowledge about these alternative fuels, or is it simply using one that's already there in lieu of a better solution, which is, of course, what the state is pushing for, which is converting completely to an electric fuel? Do they have to make a case for why they're not choosing that, but instead choosing to be in this program? Or that's not really under the purview of the LCFS itself, that's somewhere else?
It's a fun game of microphone back and forth. So the structure of the LCFS, by its nature, would encourage production of lower carbon intensive fuels and delivery into California, but it does not, have this analysis involved with individual facility and whether or not, it's more appropriate for that facility to pursue a different type of end fuel. For instance, it does incentivize the lowest carbon fuels to be produced by those facilities, but it does not mandate a specific requirement that they consider a different alternative.
Okay, thank you. We can turn that.
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Kevin, for putting that question out there. So Matt, I think we'll go back to you now for the other points you wanted to clarify on. No, you're fine. I was just passing it back to you because you said there were a few other points you wanted to clarify.
Sure, just a couple of quick points. So I did hear a couple of questions and statements about the air quality modeling done in the staff analyses, and there is information in the staff report that shows the criteria pollutant emissions benefits and emission releases associated with fuel production, transport, and end use. And that was part of the analysis that staff did for both the proposed scenario that we put in the regulatory proposal, as well as two alternatives that we analyzed for the staff report, and as well as an additional option that we evaluated, which was the Environmental Justice Advisory Committee's resolution directing or asking for us to consider a number of policy interventions around biomethane and crop-based biofuels and sustainable aviation fuel and direct air capture. So it is within the staff report, and encourage folks to take a look at it. I heard a concern and a comment about pass-through costs for the LCFS. I think, Kevin, you referenced the SREA. We did update that analysis in the staff report, so I'd encourage folks to take a look at the staff report and look at the direct cost analyses that we put into the staff report on the proposed scenario. We also looked at and included an additional analysis of what would the overall transportation costs be between now and 2045, and across California, with the deployment of increasing numbers of zero emission vehicles and lower carbon fuels, we estimated that transportation fuel costs could be roughly more than 40% lower in 2045 than they are in today's terms. So we updated that analysis to show how with policies like LCFS and other policies that CARB has adopted, we expect the prices that people pay to fuel their vehicles will go down over time. I think you had a comment, I just want to make sure I understood this one, about the staff proposal relying on availability of other state funding.
For incentive programs.
Other incentive programs.
Or funding, period, not other state funding.
Okay.
Because CARB's funding is dependent on state funding, and the funding that's coming from the tax on gasoline. So is that amount or tax on uses of fuels in the program? I guess I'm not really clear. The tax is mainly on gasoline and energy production, right?
So the LCFS is not a tax. It's it
doesn't meet criteria of tax. I get it.
You're right. So it puts a regulatory requirement on the fossil fuel producers that are required to participate in the program. But the point that I wanted to make on the funding side is that in doing the analysis for the staff's proposal, we did not assume any other state incentive or funding program would be necessary. We have to make sure that we take a conservative approach to what the future would look like, and we didn't assume that there was access to any other state grant program or funding to make the staff proposal pan out. So I just want to be clear about that.
I have to make a note, darn it.
The only other thing that I guess I will say is, taking a look at my notes here, we also in developing the analyses for the staff report, we relied on the life cycle assessments and the carbon intensity values that we have developed with the low carbon fuel standard over the course of the last decade or so. And those values are values that have been certified and verified through our program. And we use those as part of the analysis for this program. So those carbon intensity values are public, and the modeling tools, the analysis that we've done to arrive at those carbon intensity values are available. We've had a number of conversations, I think, over both the October and September Environmental Advisory Committee meetings on how we calculate those carbon intensity values. And that's it.
Thank you, Matt. Just out of curiosity, do you know in roughly how many CARB staff actually work on the low carbon fuel standard?
I can't give you a precise count off the top of my head. We have, I think, just north of maybe 20 staff at this point. And, we have, just like any program, turnover. So we've got a couple of vacancies as well.
Sure. Thank you for that. So, I just wanted to acknowledge, obviously, this is a really complex program and really appreciate you're only one staff person here to represent and speak to all of these different issues. So I do really appreciate that. On the comment about the air quality modeling, I also wanted to clarify, since that was a point that I raised, it wasn't saying that you all didn't analyze air quality impacts at all. It was, what would the impact of increased stringency of the program, what benefits would we see in terms of criteria air pollutants, and doing additional modeling on that.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification. So we did, as part of the staff analyses, look at a number of alternatives, and the alternatives that we looked at, one would be having a more stringent program without any limitations on crop-based biofuels or biomethane coming into the program. There is information in the staff report about what the costs of that increased stringency would be, as well as the additional criteria pollutant benefits associated with that scenario. We also included that analysis on what if we kept the stringency the same from what we put in the proposal, so a 30% carbon reduction by 2030 and 90% by 2045, but it included limitations on biomass-based diesel and volume limitations, included limitations on biomethane in the program, consistent with the Environmental Justice Advisory Committee's resolution, as well as limitations on direct air capture. And so that information is also in the staff report. What we found through the analysis that we did is that if you are limiting these lower carbon fuels, these alternative fuels, biomass-based diesel, biomethane, and you're limiting opportunities to credit direct air capture, you end up with more fossil diesel being used in the near term to meet the energy demands of the vehicle fleet in California. Roughly 300,000 or so heavy-duty trucks driving around. They need to be fueled. We have regulations that will push those vehicles into zero-emission vehicles over time, but those will take time to take effect. And so in the near term, you'll have a demand for liquid fuels to fuel those vehicles. And in our analysis, that demand gets met with either biofuels, biomethane, or fossil diesel, and criteria pollutants that come with the combustion associated with fossil diesel. So.
Got it. Thank you, Matt. So I see 2 10 cards in the room, and in a few minutes we are scheduled to segue to public comment. So would just and I have a couple of just quick concluding comments. So I will pass it to Kevin and then Luis, and we will look to move to public comment. Go ahead, Kevin.
Sure, and thank you for correcting my sloppy language on the incentives piece. So the incentives that the program creates, now the funding that it generates, is mainly put back into the program. Is that not correct, to folks who want to get in the program or in the program as incentives to keep producing, or for new folks to come in and produce these fuels? Would that be accurate?
Yeah, so under the program, in its simplest terms, you're either generating a deficit because your carbon intensity of your fuel is higher than the benchmark, or you're generating a credit because you have a lower carbon intensive fuel that's below the benchmark. If you're generating a deficit, you need to buy credits to be able to cover your deficit. So there's a transaction that happens between those that are producing these higher carbon intensive fuels and those that are providing lower carbon intensive fuels. That money doesn't actually touch the state. That's a purchase of credits by those higher carbon intensive producers
through the market.
Through the market, right? And so that's how the financial incentive structure gets set up. Credit prices are determined by the market. Right now, I think they're roughly around $50 to $60 a credit, and so your ability to generate revenue based on your low carbon fuel production is predicated on your carbon intensity of your fuel, how low it is, and your credit generation and the credit price that's on the market.
So how much of that incentive funding has gone into the program to like CVRP or Access Clean Cars California and Cars for All? How much of that incentive funding has gone into those programs, which are the primary programs to provide incentives to residents in low income and disadvantaged communities to be able to purchase EVs? How much of that money from this program has gone into that program?
So
has any of that money gone into that program? Probably a better question.
Fair question. So no, the money that goes into those programs, the low carbon transportation funding programs, by and large comes from the cap and trade auction proceeds. So it comes from the cap and trade program, the revenue that comes from the auctioning of allowances under that program that go to the state that are appropriated by the legislature. There's also been other appropriations made to those programs over the years, whether from the general fund or other fund sources, but not from the LCFS. The LCFS does, however, have a mechanism in it whereby the state's utilities are able to generate credits because of EVs charging on their utility network. And those credits that they generate, they obviously can sell for revenue. And there are provisions in the LCFS regulation, and there are also PUC decisions about how that revenue can be spent. That revenue has been directed towards, in the past, providing rebates for on the hood rebates for battery electric vehicles. You might have heard of the Clean Fuel Reward Program at one point in time.
Very aware of the program.
Right. And we put in additional provisions in the staff proposal and the 45-day proposal to also direct that funding in the future to zero emission vehicle deployment, particularly in the medium and heavy duty space, to help accelerate decarbonization of the vehicle fleet with zero emission vehicles, and also to provide opportunities for that funding that the utilities generate to support additional transportation electrification projects, transit, other equity-focused projects. And so that's in the staff proposal, to have the utilities focus the money that they generate from the credit sales on zero-emission vehicle transportation electrification deployment, and particularly focused on low-income and disadvantaged communities.
So again, coming back to my original question, how much of it ends up in the EV programs for people to actually get EVs, other than the clean fuels program that the IOUs were running through CPUC, which is fading fast? We're not seeing that funding land there. The EV infrastructure is great, but without vehicles in these communities, we don't see that change happening there. What use is an EV charger if you don't have a vehicle to charge there? We know we don't have enough of those, but it states here that the incentives can be used to bring those folks to EVs, and that more incentive money needs to go to that. So would your anticipated pathway for that be through the energy side, through CEC and CPUC, rather than directly passing that money through CARB to its own programs? And with regard to greenhouse gas funding, let's be real there, the legislature decides how to divvy up that money. And in the past, we've seen that fund, I'm not going to use the word rated, I'll just kind of say it, but it is not all landing, and less of it seems to be landing in these programs. And in fact, the budgets have been cut for these programs, right? So again, to put that in this plan as a potential solution, it just seems disingenuous, because again, history does not support that. And at least that's on the face. And you can't really project that out across 20 or 30 years either. So.
And just, I think what's an important point of clarification here is that the revenue that the utilities generate because of EVs charging on their network, that goes to the utility. So it never goes into the state's accounts, right, or appropriated by the legislature. And so that funding, it gets spent by the utilities. If they're IOUs, it's overseen by the CPUC. If it's POUs, they have their own requirements under our regulation for how that money gets directed. There have been individual programs done by individual utilities to help support more EV rebates for low-income customers, for instance. They are running some of those programs. And what we expect going forward, and I think this just probably makes sense to everybody here, is that as we get more light-duty battery electric vehicles growth into the future, as that becomes an increasing percentage of the vehicle population going forward, you're getting more charging happening on the utility side. They're generating more credits associated with that charging, and that creates an additional funding pool from the utilities to help support further transportation electrification, whether it's in the form of equity-focused rebates or charging or transit, for instance. And so there are provisions in the regulation, and then there's work that the PUC does to help direct that funding.
I don't want to take up any more time, but again, I will say that is speculative. They can change their minds, regulations change, commissioners change, and governors change. So to use that again as an answer to our environmental justice concerns, I'm sorry, just doesn't cut it. So I don't want to take up any more time with the other thing, but we have time for that.
Thank you, Kevin. We do want to quickly segue to public comment. We have Luis and then Tom.
So I just have some very general comments. I was just thinking that just yesterday we had a meeting yesterday, I think it was yesterday, the day before, I had a meeting in one of the 617 communities. And those funds were intended to go towards mitigating or projects that would help reduce emissions from community identified emission sources. And over the last 4 or 5 years, they have a large inventory of paid parking lots. And it's just like, it's not that that's not important, but the major sources continue. And we just blew through a lot of money. I believe there's air districts and the Air Resources Board have the knowledge, the experience, and community needs to be given more support. And so it just led me to think, like, in a way, you're also creating, and I guess it's staying true to the name, like low carbon fuel standards. So in reality, not exhausting totally regulation, enforcement, and other tools. You're basically almost creating new fuel alternatives, right? And thinking through this and listening to you makes me wonder, like, what is the checklist of considerations? Because it doesn't seem like it's a straightforward, right? It seems that there are considerations. And is there a checklist of considerations? How much of those are based on sort of the human element? How much are those based on calculations? How much are those based on enforcement, rule, regulations? Because it doesn't seem like there's a clear path for me. Like I'm trying to get a handle of this. Is like people sitting in a work table, in a workroom, coming up and designing these programs. Is it just calculations? Or is there other considerations? Because it seems like we continue to create programs that somehow continues to incentivize the industry, right? So I'm just wondering, what's the logic? Is there a logic? Or is it just straight out math? Because it's not easy for me to package it, but how much of it is the human element? How much is just straightforward math? And what is the percentage, that you're achieving? Like, what's the metric? Okay, you have this program. If it's all math, but if there's a human element to it, at the end of the day, what percentage? Like, what goes into all these programs? And is there a sort of a checklist? Is that helpful?
So, is there some master checklist that we all follow? No. I think you all know this. We spend time developing the state's scoping plan strategy that is informed by legislation and executive orders. And that scoping plan that we went through in 2022 provides the overall kind of guiding light when we come into developing individual regulatory proposals. And the most recent scoping plan focused on achieving carbon neutrality by 2045. And it also put in place a series of recommendations around accelerating decarbonization, particularly between now and 2030, to put us on that pathway to carbon neutrality by 2045. So we took the scoping plan, which was also done through a big public process. We had input from you all. And
Madam, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. It's getting very technical for me. So it's me, it's not you. Did you say carbon neutrality by 2045?
Yes.
But LCFS is not about carbon neutrality, right? Or am I misunderstanding something here?
LCFS is a regulation that will help reduce greenhouse gas emissions. We need to reduce greenhouse gas emissions to be able to achieve carbon neutrality. It is not the only policy that is necessary to achieve carbon neutrality. There are other regulations that are also needed to help get us to carbon neutrality. So it's one in a suite of many.
So if you keep doing this for 20 years, is there a sunset for this program, by the way?
No sunset.
So if you keep doing this, you're not going to achieve carbon neutrality. Am I misunderstanding something here?
If you're asking, does the LCFS guarantee we hit carbon neutrality? The answer is no. It does not guarantee that we hit carbon neutrality, but it is not.
That just kind of blew my mind here. Does the state already figured that out, or it hasn't figured that out? I mean, I'm just saying, if I knew that, I got 20 years to figure out this program of how we go to invest in carbon neutral strategies. And it goes back to what I said. It's not a low carbon fuel standard. It's a no carbon fuel standard, right? I mean, I'm just kind of blown away by this.
The overarching strategy to get to carbon neutrality is in the state's scoping plan. So happy to have a conversation about that at some other point in time. We're obviously here getting feedback, talking to you all about the low carbon fuel standard.
So Matt, if you keep doing this for 20 years, you're not going to achieve carbon neutrality, right? I mean, just a simple math. I don't understand all the technical, and I admire you for what you do, but I just want the simple math. If you keep doing this for 20 years, you're not going to achieve carbon neutrality. I mean, I was just a yes or no. I mean,
so I'm not entirely sure what you mean by keep doing this. If you mean if we keep pushing forward on reducing carbon intensity of the fuels, keep accelerating zero emission vehicle deployment, keep pushing forward on renewable electricity and our SB 100 targets, push forward on reducing short-lived climate pollutants, which are a major problem in the state and internationally, and then also pursue carbon dioxide removal strategies, do the things that we've identified in the scoping plan, we can hit carbon neutrality. There's a path to hit carbon neutrality.
As those numbers exist, did that math get done? Are they actuals or just projections?
The analysis is in the scoping plan.
Who was it that said, was it Einstein? I don't remember that quote very well, but it says, I think it says that I'll say it politely, you know, but I have to go back and read it. But I think that, I'm going to say it differently. The biggest inaccuracy in humanity is that people keep doing the same thing, expecting a different result. And I almost feel like if you keep doing the same thing, expecting a different result, it doesn't seem like, I don't know, the math in this isn't adding up to us, but is there simple math? Is there simple math that we understand this? Like, is it in a slide and you're saying, you know, we have 1,000, I don't know, gallons of carbon, and this is the simple math of how we're going to reduce it to zero? Does that exist? Matt, if it doesn't, it can come back in future meeting, you know, but I just want to know the simple math. Yeah. And I'm willing to sit down and be shown all of that. Thank you.
All right, Tom, and then I will wrap us up and we will go to public comments. So if you are in the audience and you have not raised your hand yet, please raise your hand on Zoom so that we can add you to the queue.
Yeah, I wanted to say something real quick because I realized I'd said something earlier and just wanted to clarify in case for folks that were listening to the predicament that I was talking about. I mentioned how the Planning Commission voted down this facility being permitted. So people might have thought, oh, well, it's not happening. So what are you worried about? That they appealed and the city council unanimously approved it. The difference between the planning commission being they don't run for office and they don't take donations or contributions and don't have to worry about that. Whereas the city council members do have to worry about bringing in funding for their next reelection. And I want to make one other point. I'm trying to head off some of the arguments that I've heard from others, which is that, well, maybe they were not going to use trucks. They might use train cars. I have a great video if you'd like to see a train right by my house, because I live within 75 yards of the train track. If anybody would like to see a train, a switcher car sitting there emitting, I have a great video for you, and you can see if you'd want 15 more of those. Well, it's 15 more cars, but that would obviously increase the amount of switcher cars you would need bringing those in and out. So I just wanted to mention that. And one more last comment. I kind of got distracted while I was speaking. It kind of is related to this morning. I know it's not related to LCFS, but I was literally getting a text from staff who are right now in that neighborhood handing out flyers, going door to door, letting people know about a meeting we're going to have to talk about this facility and what folks think about it. And they had the sheriffs called on them. Now, luckily, the sheriffs got there and they understood what whoever called the cops didn't understand, which was that they were on the sidewalk, not blocking the sidewalk, not harassing anybody. So the sheriffs came and, said, yeah, you're not doing anything wrong. But I just thought it was kind of interesting to kind of end on that note from the conversation this morning, that this is the stuff that we deal with in both trying to not get polluting sources added to our community to improve public health, but also, when we do stuff, we deal with that often. Get the cops called on you. They don't like, what you're talking about. And so that was the reason why maybe I left a couple things out and got distracted, because I was dealing with those messages right at that moment. And then one other note that I had written down that I missed because I kind of added it. I tried to write down Chair Randolph's words verbatim this morning, because going to my first point about what I was told the purpose of the EJAC was, she literally opened up with her comments about the importance of this, about the importance of listening to EJ communities, about the importance of looking at what we're doing and it not increasing pollution in those communities. That's the whole reason why we have this committee and why you ask for our opinion. So I wasn't quick enough to write it down word for word, but that was basically what she said. And that's what I was trying to say. And I just don't see it happening. Thank you.
So on that note, I do think we are better off as we work to increase dialogue and transparency. And as I noted earlier, the EJAC is barely into a year of being permanent. So I recognize there are always growing pains, and we're all figuring out how to work and be in dialogue together. So my last request of staff would be, if you all are available, and I totally understand you probably can't answer right now, but we are meeting again on March 15th, and we do plan to continue discussing this item. So it would be very helpful if you all can come back and present on some more of the specifics about where the resolution was integrated. Again, recognizing part of why people like Kevin Hamilton know that it's 146 pages is because there are some of us that read all 146 pages, and then there are some of us that frankly just don't have the time, the capacity, or just have basic questions about the technical jargon. So it would be really helpful if we could continue the dialogue with you all on March 15th. And I do want to underscore what everyone else has so eloquently spoken to. Really appreciate the preparation and engaged dialogue from Carbon Work Group members and EJAC members generally, that we are really looking to ensure that the transition off of fossil fuels is just, and that environmental justice communities have decreased burdens and increased benefits. So want to reiterate, the EJAC policy asks that CARB initiate rulemaking on emissions from dairies pursuant to SB 1383 and integrate all components of the EJAC resolution. And with that, I'm going to pass it back to Ashley to take us to public comment.
Thank you, Dr. Catherine. So just wanted to mention we're on item 5 on the agenda, which is our public comment period. We currently have 18 commenters total. We have 5 in the room, 13 online. So we ask that everyone who is still interested in speaking, please raise your hand or sign up in the room if you have not done so already. We will switch off between those who are in the room and those who are on Zoom, starting with the room first. Each commenter will have 3 minutes. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen so we can pull that up for you so that you have the timer. Please be as succinct as you can. I know it's hard with something that is this complicated. We would really appreciate that so we can make sure we get to everyone. Also, just a reminder for us as well as the court reporter, please make sure that you do state your name and affiliation before you provide your question or comment. We'd really appreciate that. So we will start in the room here with Sasan Sadat, and if I do mispronounce anyone's name, I apologize about that in advance.
Thank you. Thank you, EJAC board members and staff and everyone for your continued work on the rule. Sasan Sadat with Earth Justice. So in our view, the root problems that we have been raising throughout the course of this rulemaking, a glut of bogus credits that are tanking the credit price, and the program's lopsided support for polluting fuels over zero emission pathways have either not been addressed or gotten worse. Earth Justice was stunned to see the changes to the avoided methane crediting make a bad problem worse. Of course, we oppose staff's initial proposal presented during workshops to delay the phase out in new pathways until 2030, but at least then CARB staff acknowledged a need to discontinue this practice. I went back and listened to the board meeting and pulled quotes where several board members raised similar concerns about this delayed phase out. Some board members specifically called for, in quotes, tightening the data for, quote, initiating rulemaking in 2024, or, quote, fear of allowing credits over a decade to create economic dependence. To my knowledge, it's unprecedented for such a major policy change to come without clear and public board direction, and indeed, which runs counter to the clear concerns of many board members. And it's also worth mentioning that these run counter to the clear concerns of dozens of environmental justice residents who drove to Sacramento to tell CARB about how these fuels harm their livelihoods. And shockingly, this was not even acknowledged or recognized in the environmental justice section of the ISOR. Reading the ISOR, you could be mistaken to think CARB has never been made aware of these well-documented concerns. Similarly, we're unaware of the direction to include a certification scheme to trace crop fuels when the main publicly discussed recommendation from the EJAC and others was to set a cap on lipid fuels. Tracing the origins of lipids, as staff proposes, will not prevent the overconsumption of a globally fungible commodity. And this idea was never workshopped and no environmental group asked for it. So we are alarmed also by the recent data, which shows soybean oil is gushing into California's programs at rates that already far exceed CARB's forecast in the ISOR, where they peak at volumes that are expected to be hit in 2026. These are major developments and major policy changes that have been made since September's board meeting that the board has not yet had the opportunity to publicly vet. Beyond these policy disputes, Earth Justice and our partners have not been able to obtain basic input and output spreadsheets that undergird staff's justification for their proposed scenario or rejecting the EJ scenario. We asked for this information. We know other public interest groups have, scientists, academics, and for our part, at least, we've been told to submit a PRA to get this information, which we have now done. But this is a major roadblock for us to be able to provide meaningful comments on the program in time for the February 20th comment deadline. And with the majority of the board members voting officially on this rule for the first time, and so many major policy changes with profound environmental justice impacts at stake, we think the board and the public needs another opportunity to provide direction on this rule. We've therefore formally requested CARB hold an informational meeting this March to allow further incorporation. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. Next, we have Grace Sheena Mohibar.
Hi, Grishina Mohabir with California Environmental Voters. Good afternoon. We appreciate the opportunity to comment on the work that the EJAC is doing on the LCFS reg updates. And we'd like to voice concern for the fact that the EJAC's comprehensive EJ scenario or 8-point resolution, as well as the concerns of EJ groups, weren't reflected in the staff proposal from December. The future of our state's transportation is zero emission, and we should be planning for that future. As such, we recognize that the dairy digester biogas is counterintuitive to these goals. By promoting offsets over reductions, this encourages major polluters to continue their status quo. Furthermore, this incentivizes the use of combustion fuels, which has frankly no role in this transition to zero emissions. Digester operations come at the expense of disadvantaged communities, which we know are disproportionately subjected to air and water quality issues that are caused by these factory farms. We're here to urge staff to reconsider the recommendations put forth by the EJAC as well as EJ groups. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, we have Akshita Siva Kumar. Okay. What about Michael Bocadoro?
Thank you, Michael Bocadoro on behalf of Dairy Cares, and I will just reiterate our offer to come and provide a thorough briefing to the EJAC committee. I've made this request on numerous occasions. I'm making it again today. It's clear from the discussion here and some of the comments made by EJAC board members that there continues to be a flawed understanding of how our comprehensive dairy methane reduction programs work in California. We would love the opportunity to come provide a thorough briefing, answer questions of the committee members. I've made this to no avail in the past. I'm hoping the Environmental Justice Advisory Committee will reconsider, give us a few moments of your time to try and answer some questions and hopefully correct some of the misperceptions about how our dairy farm families operate here in California. I cringe when I hear terms like factory farms or industrialized dairies. These are family-owned and operated dairies here in California. It's disrespectful to those families to call them anything other than family-operated dairies. Some of our dairy farms are larger than you will find in other states, and they're smaller than you'll find in many other states. We operate differently here in California. We've recently read about comparisons between California and Wisconsin dairies. It's comparing apples and oranges. We operate in a much different climate. There was recent criticism that we have a lot of flush dairies here in California. It's true, we do. Flush dairies don't work in Wisconsin for a reason. Flush dairies become ice rinks in Wisconsin in freezing temperatures. You can't flush manure, but it's a very efficient way of managing waste in California. Not uncommon with how we manage waste in urban areas. We flush waste to a centralized location where we can manage it. Contrary to popular myth, dairy digesters are not increasing pollution. They're dramatically decreasing it, and the facts bear that out. It's really important if you want to have a full understanding of how these programs operate, that you invite us in, allow us to share information, allow you to ask questions, and allow us to respond. So I respectfully request again to be given that opportunity at a future EJAC meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. We do have Phoebe Seaton in the room next, but I just wanted to make sure the Zoom queue is also ready. We'll be starting in Zoom with Jan Warren after Phoebe Seaton.
Thanks so much, Phoebe Seaton, Leadership Council for Justice and Accountability. I think one of my colleagues is going to speak later, so I was just actually going to use my time for some just very specific clarifying questions to staff. I did miss the early part of the meeting, so I'm not sure if you're going to be able to answer these questions, but I wanted to kind of clarify some, potential ambiguity in the language. I think Sasan spoke to this, as did Catherine. Is our read correct that the updated draft regulations released on January 5th and the ISOR extend the possibility of avoided methane crediting to 2059 for CNG and beyond for other technologies, including electric? So that's one question. And then the follow-up is, if that's the correct read, what is the interaction between that kind of 30 years or so, 40 years of avoided methane crediting for livestock methane and CARB's duty to directly regulate livestock methane.
Thank you. So we will be transitioning to our Zoom commenters, starting first with Jan Warren. Jan, we'll be unmuting you at this point, and you should be able to speak. Jan? Well, let's move on to Amelia. Oh, Jan, one more time, just checking to see if you are now unmuted.
I just got it. Am I
Perfect. We can hear you. Thanks, Jan.
It takes a while. Thank you. Jan Warren from Contra Costa County with Northern California Refineries. And I just, first of all, since I didn't know I was going to have this extra minute, I want to thank the Environmental Justice Committee because this is so frustrating to me. I can't imagine how hard it is for you. This is the third one of these on LCFF that I've been to, and it's tough. So we need to acknowledge that the federal laws in this country are written by industry. They receive support by helping to create incentives that benefit the selling of their products. In 1978, a gallon of unleaded gasoline, believe it or not, was 65 to 71 cents. And at that point, they were a wonderful energy tax act provided them with 40 cents exemption by adding 10% ethanol. All these years, and ethanol is still receiving subsidies. Part of our concern with these programs you're developing. Ethanol is now part of the gravy train for alternative fuels. Look at the Alternative Fuels Data Center website that I looked at today, and you're going to find 28 laws and incentives relating to biofuels. What guardrails does this revision include on crop-based fuels? Instead of extensions, caps need to be put on biofuels and biogas. LCFS was supposed to move dollars toward electrification, producing renewable electricity in larger amounts. There's way too much incentive to control the growth of these biogas and biofuel products. We saw the same thing happen with cap and trade when it was extended. It's very difficult, like the ethanol, to turn the spigot off. It's like a runaway train. Since 2020, the U.S. has been a net exporter of petroleum. Fuels refined and exported are completely exempt. Roughly a third of the fuels refined in California are sold out of state. From refining and burning exported fuel are not taken into account. Biorefining is carbon intensive and uses more hydrogen per barrel than petroleum. The LCFS funnels money into biofuels that further pollute already burdened communities. This proposal has no meaningful safeguards against the risk of biofuels. I continue to support the EJAC recommendations and their request for an extension. And I always like to close with who is harmed and who benefits. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Amelia Keys. Amelia, your line has been unmuted and you can begin to speak.
Hi, thank you. Thanks to the EJAC and to CARB for this opportunity. I'm Amelia Keys, and I'm an attorney with Communities for a Better Environment, an organization that represents EJ communities living alongside petroleum refineries in Northern and Southern California. Throughout this rulemaking process, we've been asking CARB to place a cap on crop-based biofuels. We've told CARB that these combustion fuels will continue the long legacy of polluting our communities and will displace much-needed opportunities to expand access to zero-emission vehicles and other clean transportation options. Our communities are already experiencing the consequences of biofuel expansion. Money from the LCFS is breathing new life into oil refineries in the Bay Area. The Marathon Martinez refinery, which had finally shut down after 100 years of polluting the area, recently reopened to start producing renewable diesel. Phillips 66 in Rodeo has also recently converted to biofuels. I'll just highlight three major issues here with these biofuel conversions and the growth of biofuels. So first, these refining processes produce significant levels of local air pollution. and new opportunities for health emergencies. Since reopening, the Martinez refinery has had frequent flaring incidents, including an alarming incident this fall that spewed a powdery substance throughout the area that contained heavy metals. Second, biofuel refining creates new climate risks that CARB has not fully acknowledged or measured in this rulemaking or elsewhere. In December, CARB approved a Tier 2 fuel pathway application from Phillips 66 in Rodeo to produce renewable diesel from imported Argentinian soybean oil. This growing reliance on imports of virgin crop feedstocks is only increasing, and yet CARB has made no efforts to measure the particularly large risks of land use changes from South American feedstock markets. Third, these biofuel refineries have obstructed the environmental safeguards that CARB relies on to justify incentivizing biofuels. A California court found that the Phillips 66 biofuel conversion project is in violation of the California Environmental Quality Act and required the county to do a revised environmental impact report. Throughout this legal process, CARB has not stopped or paused approval of biofuel pathways at this refinery, despite the refinery's violation of state environmental laws. So to wrap up, by failing to place meaningful safeguards on biofuels, CARB has abandoned environmental justice communities in a catch-22 in which no agency, neither state nor local, will take responsibility for the environmental harms caused by these fuels. Thank you.
Thank you. Jeremy Martin, your line has been unmuted.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you great. Thank you.
Great. Yes, thanks. My name is Jeremy Martin from the Union of Concerned Scientists, and thanks for the opportunity to comment and for all the testimony from EJAC. The low carbon fuel standard is badly out of balance. We've got way too many credits generated by vegetable oil-based renewable diesel and manure biomethane based on exaggerated claims of their greenhouse gas benefits. These fuels don't support the transition to a zero-emission future that's envisioned in the scoping plan and embraced by the board and officials. Unfortunately, the proposal also won't stabilize credit prices, and of course, stable credit prices are necessary for the LCFS to continue to support electrification. As long as the proposal does not address the flood of credits from these renewable diesel and biomethane, it's just not gonna work. I've written about this extensively in some recent articles, so I won't dwell on it here. But it also just doesn't make sense to ask California drivers to cover the costs of building manure digesters all over the country at huge CAFOs very far from California, or frankly, to cover the cost of bidding up the price of vegetable oil on global markets, which is what amounts, what the big run up in renewable diesel amounts to. I also want to make a process point. I completely agree that the meeting in March should be an informational meeting without a vote. The proposal that we've got needs a great deal of work, and we need more information to comment on it. I've been working on low carbon fuel standard rulemakings now for 15 years or so, and I've been through a lot of them. And this proposal, or this rulemaking process, has some serious problems. For one thing, the ideas that we discussed in 2 years of workshops were suddenly dropped in the final proposal. The spreadsheets we need to evaluate the alternatives in terms of how many volumes and credits are associated with different pathways are not available. I've asked for them. We've been told we can't have them. So I encourage the board to have an informational meeting, review the proposal, provide us the data we need to assess it, and then we need to fix it properly. We need sensible limits on how much vegetable oil is used to make fuel. We need to phase out avoided methane credits, and we need to rebalance the low carbon fuel standard so that it will support the zero emission transportation future that we need. So thanks again.
Thank you. Tim Maddox, your line is unmuted. Tim, we cannot hear you. Okay. We'll move to, oh, now I can hear you, Tim. Yes.
Okay. All right. Yes, my name is Tim Maddox, and I'm an SEIU United Service Workers West member. I've worked at LAX for almost 30 years. As an airport worker here, I want to share how every day we are exposed to jet fuel emissions and the chemicals that we deal with every day. And I'm really concerned about the environmental and health impact it's having on me, my family. I also live in Inglewood, which is just 3 miles east of LAX. And we live directly under the flight path of the aircraft go over. And, we're constantly, not only the air pollution, the fuel pollution, but the noise emission that we are hearing every day. And, I have coworkers that have chronic illnesses because of this. Luckily, I have not gotten sick, but I know coworkers and friends who have asthma and respiratory problems and also hearing problems caused by the loud noise. I want to ask that jet fuel be included in the low carbon fuel standard, and airplanes need to be regulated too. And thank you for your work that you were doing there. And just as a worker, as many workers there at LAX, we ask for your help in dealing with this problem.
Thank you. Next is Leslie Martinez. Leslie, your line has been unmuted.
Hi, everybody. Un segundo, Maria. We're going to have a speaker in Spanish that needs translation.
Good afternoon. This is Mark, your interpreter. Let me assist. This is for Miss Martinez. Is that correct?
No, this is going to be for Maria Arevalo from Pixley, California.
María Arevalo. Thank you. Señora Arevalo, aquí habla Marco. Yo soy su intérprete. Le voy a pedir, por favor, que hable en frases cortas y que pause para yo poder interpretarle todo lo que diga.
Está bien, muchas gracias.
Adelante, por favor. Gracias.
Buenas tardes, mi nombre es María Arevalo. He vivido en Pixley por 47 años.
Good afternoon. My name is María Arevalo. I've lived in Pixley for 47 years now.
Y estoy en representación de mi comunidad de Pixley. Estamos un grupo aquí tratando de decir nuestros sentimientos.
And I'm here representing my community here in Pixley. In fact, there's a group here wanting to share our experience, our perspective.
Estamos aquí porque quiero expresar a la mesa del aire y a todos aquellos que están allí para cuidar del aire limpio y el agua limpia. El reporte de ustedes no incluye nuestros comentarios en sus propuestas.
Gracias, permítame un segundito. And I'm here because I want to express the Air Board and all of those who are there to help care for this, which is our clean air and our clean water. I want to express that our comments have not been reflected in your documentation. Diga, por favor.
No incluyeron nuestros comentarios en sus propuestas. Y como se ve, a todos que hemos ido a pedir ayuda por contaminación del aire o amoníaco, no nos han escuchado, nos han ignorado la comunidad de Pixley.
We've noticed that your proposals do not include our comments, and as far as we can tell, all of those who have come to ask for help, all of those from my community have come and discussed the contamination that we have in our air, the ammonia that we're contaminated with. We feel that we've not been heard. You have not listened to us.
Y nosotros necesitamos su ayuda, porque este olor a amoníaco te despide un digestador en Pixley, en una milla al norte de Pixley, está acabando con nuestra salud.
And we're here to ask for your help. We need your help. This smell, this ammonia smell that's contaminated our air, it's coming from a dairy digester that lies just 1 mile north of Pixley, and it's damaging our health.
Ahora, enfrente de Carl Green, del digestador de desecho de vaca y orina, cual despide el amoníaco.
And this is coming from the dairy digester. It's in front of Cal Green. And they're the ones, of course, working with cattle waste and manure. They're the ones that are creating this ammonia contamination.
Enfrente de él están haciendo una compañía que hará hidrógeno.
And right in front of them, they're bringing about bringing another company that's going to create hydrogen.
Dos, metano y hidrógeno emisiones irán a Pixley. Entre dos emisiones, juntos los dos gases acabarán matando la comunidad más pronto en Pixley.
And these two emissions, methane and hydrogen, just those two are going to continue hurting Pixley. In fact, those will kill off our community here in Pixley.
Y ustedes serán responsables porque en mi casa usamos un compresor de aire con albuterol que abre los pulmones para poder respirar durante la noche.
And you would be responsible for that. In my home, for example, we have to use an air machine with albuterol so that we can breathe our air at night.
3 miembros, un hijo de 26 años, un nieto de 11 años y yo de 74 años. Tenemos que usar una máscara de nariz y boca con albuterol para abrir los pulmones.
3 members of my family, that's a 26-year-old son, 11-year-old grandson, and myself, 74 years old. We all have to use a mask that covers our nose and our mouth to breathe an albuterol mask so that we can breathe at night.
El niño de 11 años es muy pequeño para tener este problema de tener que lavar cada tercer día una máquina para mantener limpio y no infectar sus pulmones.
Our 11-year-old boy, he is too young to have to deal with this problem. He has to clean a machine every 3 days so that he doesn't get an infection from using this machine from which he has to breathe albuterol to have clean air.
Si el aire no sube a su sangre, el cerebro no recibe oxígeno y él no aprende en la escuela.
If not enough oxygen gets into his blood doesn't get to his brain. And what's going to happen? He's not going to learn anything at school.
Esa es la historia de toda mi comunidad en Pixley.
And that's the story in my entire community here in Pixley.
Toda la gente enferma. Por eso necesitamos con urgencia la ayuda de la mesa del aire y todo aquel que pueda limpiar la contaminación del aire y del agua.
That's the story here for everyone. Everyone is at risk of getting sick. And that's why we need your help. We need the air board help and the help of anyone who's involved in cleaning our air and our water.
Ya se acabó su tiempo, María.
Gracias. Thank you so much. Gracias.
Hi, and then I'm going to give my personal comment. I'm Leslie Martinez with Leadership Council. Hi, my name is...
Go ahead, Leslie.
Okay, so Leslie with Leadership Council. I just want to talk about, I work with residents here in the San Joaquin Valley throughout, and it's the same story that we hear again and again. But another story that I think is important, and I think is especially important for the EJAC to hear, is we are constantly being approached by CARB staff to support in workshops, to support in bringing folks out to give public comment. And frankly, like as an organizer and as a lifelong resident of San Joaquin Valley, born and raised, it's getting harder and harder for folks to have faith in this agency, as it continuously we've seen them be ignored. We were told that the scoping plan wasn't the correct place to bring up community concerns around the LCFS. We were told that, you know, it was too early at other parts of the LCFS. Every single time residents bring concerns, they are ignored. They are not taken, they are not considered to be real data. I keep hearing data driven. Community experience is data driven. Community experience is an asthma bill that people can't pay. It's the cost of gas. And at the end of the day, that is an effect that you are all helping and you are all encouraging. At the end of the day, we need to ensure that this program doesn't hurt communities, and it doesn't hurt the communities who have already historically been hurt by this agency for decades, by this state. It is insane to me how the place that has some of the worst air in California, some of the worst poverty, where hospitals are closing down, that this agency and staff has ignored any public health concerns that have risen from community residents. I really ask that as we move forward in this process, we think through what message we're telling community members when we ask them to show up only to tell them that they're wrong, only to tell them that their concern is not valid. As we continue through this process, I really encourage you to stop and really reflect as to how you expect the community to continue to show up, and you hear back from community if you're only going to take the good things and not try to address their issues. I think this is I think that the LCFS is not ready to go to the vote, and I definitely support all the EJAC recommendations. And I really look forward to a time where community residents' public health concerns are actually addressed and not pushed to the side because they don't fit the narrative of reducing methane, where I would question the math that a lot of people tout. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Next, we have Tyler Lobdell. Tyler, you have been unmuted.
Okay, Maria.
Great, thank you. Are you able to hear me? Sorry.
No, you sound great. Thank you.
Okay, great. Yeah, good afternoon. Tyler Lobdell, and I'm a staff attorney with Food and Water Watch, and just want to start by thanking you all for your time and for the really incredibly important work that y'all are doing. So despite years of advocacy, voluminous evidence and analysis, and as was just alluded to, testimony from Californians harmed by CARB's extreme incentives for factory farm pollution, CARB staff have proposed LCFS amendments that double down on the problem while completely ignoring the adverse and disparate impacts these perverse incentives are causing. CARB staff has not only rejected this body's recommendations as they pertain to factory farming and manure biogas, it has gone full throttle in the other direction. So I want to clarify something that it seems like has been raised a few times, and that is whether there's any sort of a phase out of factory farm gas by 2040 or 2045, as some sources have characterized the proposal. That's not what's happening here. Instead, CARB staff is proposing to supercharge the existing perverse incentives for mega dairies in the Central Valley to expand, to consolidate, and to produce as much climate pollution as possible so they can monetize it. The 2040-2045 dates only apply to projects that fail to break ground essentially before 2030. Any project that goes before that deadline is eligible for these perverse incentives up through 2060. And as was alluded to, it appears that biogas to electricity pathways, one of the most inefficient and polluting type of fuel pathway in the program, have no restrictions whatsoever, and thus appear eligible for perpetual lavish crediting. This is not a phase out. In fact, this structure is designed to ramp up the pressure on factory farm gas developers to expand and build out as much as possible over the next 5 to 6 years to the detriment of community and environmental health. And unfortunately, that's really only half of it. Instead of recognizing that paying factory farms to pollute as much as possible is backward policy, CARB's express plan here is to entrench factory farms and their methane pollution as a foundational source of dirty hydrogen production in the future, but for non-transportation purposes. This proposal exposes that CARB staff is working overtime to ensure that the largest factory farms continue to pollute California communities in perpetuity and that they get paid to do so. And through all of this, CARB staff willingly ignores the many environmental and public health costs that have been raised for years now associated with factory farm gas fuels. For example, in the uplifting environmental justice section of the ISOR, not a single mention of dairies, communities affected by large dairy pollution, or the scientific evidence that digested manure is worse for public health and the environment than the already dangerous factory farm practices underlying gas production. So with all this, again, sincerely appreciate the EJAC's work. Hope that you demand board members reject this staff proposal that fails to take your recommendations seriously. And Food and Water Watch fully supports Earthjustice's letter and the request regarding the March hearing so that board members and the public can have a meaningful chance to revise this offensive proposal. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Armando Munoz. We have unmuted their line.
Hi, hello.
We can hear you.
Can you hear me? Okay, hi, how are you doing
Yes.
today? Hi, nice to meet you. My name is Armando Munoz, and I'm a member from SEIU, local USWW. I've been working at the airport for the past 14 years. As a matter of fact, I've been living in the pathway at the airport for the past 20 years. As an airport worker, I'm here to share how I'm exposed every day to airline emissions. I am concerned about the environmental and health impact it is having on me and my family, who work and live near LAX as well. Working at the terminals, I'm always breathing airplane emissions, which has affected a lot of my coworkers' health as well. A lot of my coworkers are getting asthma and are able not to breathe normally. They have to use devices when they get home. I also live in the flight path for over a few years, as I mentioned before, and I'm exposed to these toxins not only in my neighborhood but as well as work where I live. It's my community has been affected. We have to do something about this. I asked that jet fuel be included in the low carbon fuel standard. Airplanes need to be also regulated and held accountable to these communities that they affected it. And thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next, we have Dan Ress. Dan, your line has been unmuted.
Good afternoon. My name is Dan Ress, and I am a senior attorney for the Center on Race, Poverty, and the Environment, speaking today from my home in Kern County and standing in solidarity with EJAC and your recommendations on the LCFS. I want to point out a few issues with both direct air capture and dairy digesters in the staff proposal. Direct air capture, or DAC, is a means of removing ambient carbon dioxide from the atmosphere at great expense and profound energy burden. If the state decides to deploy DAC, it must be deployed only to offset those last emissions, for which we truly don't have other good options, given how expensive and energy inefficient it is. Transportation fuels are not in that category, so DAC has no business in this program. Yet CARB staff have proposed to allow DAC projects anywhere in the nation to generate LCFS credits. As such, DAC projects receiving credits will not be carbon negative because they will be offset by increased carbon intensity of California transportation fuels. DAC projects that are not carbon negative offer no benefit, but rather sit as monuments to bad climate policy, billion-dollar Rube Goldberg machines built at the expense of taxpayers and through the LCFS, people who drive cars. Further, unlike many other programs in the LCFS as proposed, DAC is allowed to generate credits in other mandatory and voluntary climate crediting programs. As a result, DAC is likely to be double, triple, or even quadruple credited, such that it won't just fail to be carbon negative, but will in fact facilitate increased emissions through reductions that won't happen in multiple offset markets. Financing projects through the LCFS generally is effectively a regressive gas tax. Low-income communities of color, especially in rural areas like the Central Valley, are more likely to need cars for transportation, yet they're the least able to afford higher gas prices. Tacking on DAC, which offers at best speculative climate benefits, and at worst, as through the staff proposal on the LCFS, serious climate harms and likely significant local harms, will only exacerbate injustice. What's more, DAC projects, which do create local risks and harms, are likely to be located in those same rural low-income communities of color that will be most burdened, and those same communities will be among the last to be able to afford electric vehicles, even as the costs from the LCFS grow higher for gas buyers. Because of disinvestment and environmental racism, some of these communities don't even have access to the electric grid, even if community members could somehow afford an expensive EV, yet they are asked to bear these costs. A similar dynamic exists for dairy digesters, which offer no climate benefits and likely significant climate harms, severe local harms, yet increased gas costs for the same frontline communities that will be most burdened by the local environmental harms from the program. That is unjust. That is a failure for climate and communities, and that is something CARB must fix. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have David Rodriguez. David, your line has been unmuted. David, we cannot hear you if you're speaking.
Hello?
Hi, David, we can hear you now.
Okay, thank you. Yes, my name is David Rodriguez. I live in Planada, California, which is in Merced County, part of the Central Valley. And I've been living here since 1960. Population a little bit over 4,000. Hillcrest Dairy arrived in 2002 with over 3,000 cows. In 2012, they were out of compliance with Merced County with over 8,000 cows. Our town population is only a little bit over 4,000. And I've gone to the Board of Supervisors in Merced County to complain with a group of citizens as well. But it goes and it falls on deaf ears. I've had the opportunity, pleasure to go up to Washington, D.C. and speak with the EPA. I met a gentleman by the name of John Lucy, Robin Collins, Ron Schneider, Setra Kumar, and other people, and issue our complaints. I've sent a letter to Martha Guzman in Regional 9 EPA, and I received a letter from Sarah Sharp. But everything seems to fall on deaf ears, and I don't know why. The original program of the LCFS was to reduce carbon intensity by 10% in California by 2020. I don't believe that has been done. CARB was also required to perform the analysis of the incentive-based program, but it also blocked the agency from implementing any new regulations for reducing the emissions until 2024. So here we are talking about the same problems we had in the past. I know California has allocated $350 million to build digesters. Digester programs would undercut the state's overarching environment goals and public health priorities. California regulators have not adequately evaluated the program's threat to local air and small round communities. So we implore your help. Just like Pixley and other small towns, our population is about 97% Latinos. Half of them probably don't even speak English, but they do suffer just like the rest of us. And I implore your help with every department that pertains to clean air and water. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure everyone in the room knows we have 7 commenters left in Zoom. Our next commenter is Stephen Rosenblum. Stephen, your line has been unmuted.
Yeah, thank you very much. I appreciate you're all waiting so long in this session. It's been a long day for you all. My name is Stephen Rosenblum. I'm a member of Climate Action California. It's an organization that fights for cleaning up the environment and trying to fight for climate change. And I think the members of the EJAC really understand the issues quite well. As some of you pointed out, you have data from your communities, and that's much better than modeling input, which CARB uses. As was pointed out by one of your members, if you have a model that has bad data going into it, you're going to get wrong information out of it. And that's what CARB uses for the LCFS. They used it for cap and trade. They used it for the GREET, for evaluating fuels. If they put bad data in those models, they're going to get wrong answers. And that's what we're seeing. For example, the avoided emissions credit for methane is based on an assumption that burning this methane from cows is going to somehow help the climate. If as one of your members pointed out, he wanted a yes or no answer as to whether we're going to get to zero. The only way we're going to get to zero carbon is by stopping burning carbon, regardless of where it comes from. And that means we have to transition to renewables like wind and solar and battery storage and stop with all these ideas about biofuels and ag methane. So I just wanted to talk specifically about some of the issues raised on this. Mr. Bocadoro claims that we're calling them names when we say that these factory farms are not factory farms. We just heard from this gentleman where there's 8,000 cows. I can't see how you could call that a family farm. A family farm means to me a farm with a husband and a wife and 2 kids, and they're taking care of some cows. There's no way they're going to take care of 8,000 cows. That's a factory, not a farm, a family farm. And then besides the environmental and air pollution, these farms also produce water pollution, flies, ammonia, smells, as other people have pointed out. So it's a lot more than just the hydrogen part of the methane part of it. With regard to biofuels, they're not a solution. As was mentioned, there's 2 refineries in the Bay Area now being proposed to go into full production of renewable diesel. If they use soybean oil as their input, they're going to be using 45% of the total soy crop of the United States. That will convert that food cropland into fuel cropland. And that's not taken account of in the indirect land use conversion.
Thank you, Stephen. Your time is up. Our next commenter is Rita Loof. Rita, your microphone has been unmuted.
Good afternoon. Rita Loof, Director of Environmental Affairs for RADTIC International. RADTIC is the trade association for ultraviolet electron beam light emitting diode UV LED industry. We are a national nonprofit dedicated to education in industries like auto body shops, printing, fingernail polish, and dental applications. Unlike conventional inks and coatings, UV LED products do not evaporate. Instead, they are specifically formulated to react to energy, and therefore no volatile organic compounds are generated. UV LED processes are also all electric and do not produce NOx, SOx, and greenhouse gases. My comments today are related to Appendix D, local actions of the AB 32 scoping plan, specifically on page 3, which mentions that AB 32 directs CARB to ensure that the greenhouse gas emission reduction programs and incentives direct public and private investment toward the most disadvantaged communities in California and provide an opportunity for small businesses and other institutions to participate in and benefit from statewide efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. I wanted to make EJAC aware that some of the policies at the local level are actually having the opposite effect of what the scoping plan envisioned. As an example, the SCA-QMD permitting rules act as a barrier to the implementation of clean technologies in manufacturing. Businesses who go above and beyond regulatory requirements get no benefit whatsoever. Currently, the SCA-QMD fee rule does not even have a category for low VOC materials, and the clean materials have to pay the same amount of fees as the polluting materials. Businesses get no credit for removing equipment that burns fossil fuels and convert to electric equipment. Reminds me of the Spanish phrase, justos pagan por pecadores, which loosely translated means the just pay for the sins of the sinners. AB 32 envisions a partnership between the environmental justice community and the business community to achieve emission reduction of greenhouse gases. And organizations like ours share CARB's vision for greenhouse gas reductions. But it's hard to feel like a participant when we're not even allowed equal access to the community steering committees. So we hope that we can partner with you in the future, and thank you so much.
Thank you. Next, we have Brent Newell. Brent, your line has been unmuted.
Good afternoon. My name is Brent Newell, and I represent Leadership Council for Justice and Accountability. I'd like to make 2 points this afternoon. First, with regard to Senate Bill 1383, the legislature was quite direct and unambiguous in directing CARB that it shall adopt regulations to limit methane from manure management. The legislature did not give CARB discretion to disregard that unambiguous mandate. CARB shall do it. Yet, the executive officer of CARB, Dr. Stephen Cliff, on September 28th told the board that to initiate that rulemaking. Instead, CARB is doubling down on avoided methane crediting and abandoning its 2040 phase out. The legislature did not give CARB the authority to use the low carbon fuel standard as this gigantic incentive machine for hydrogen production, for stationary source fuel, and for running the low carbon fuel standard after 2030. My second point is that Matt Botiel tried to walk back the massive pass-through cost gas tax that's happening here to pay for biomethane fuels, to pay for these biodiesel fuels. What is unambiguous in the ISOR is that the cost of credits that oil companies will have to pay is more than $120 billion cumulatively through the program. Now, they're not going to absorb that cost. CARB's ISOR tries to walk back the complexity of gas prices and so on, and tries to gaslight the public and say that the overall cost to drive for Californians will go down because of the LCFS. You know, averaging out the cost doesn't make that pass-through cost go away. Rather, those communities that can't afford electric vehicles will pay for that $128.8 billion cost at the pump. Now, CARB needs to listen to the EJAC. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Brett Zuner. Brett, your line has been unmuted.
Hello, thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Brett Zuner, and I'm speaking today as an individual and a resident of California, calling in from Los Angeles. My experience and perspective on these issues are informed both by my lived experience as well as my work experience as a program manager at the Foundation for California Community Colleges, where I manage the implementation of a regional ZEV incentive program and support community-led outreach and engagement with our college students and CBO partners. But today, speaking as a member of the public, I wanted to just emphasize something about green hydrogen. And when I say green hydrogen, I'm referring to hydrogen fuel produced with solar, wind, or geothermal electricity and responsibly sourced water. I don't say renewable electricity because even that term has become polluted, pun intended. And I think there's huge potential for cleaning up heavy and medium duty transportation and air travel, and the science supports that. But I'm concerned after reading the LCFS updates that we might destroy the prospect of truly green hydrogen, really becoming a thing in this state and possibly the country if we fail to distinguish truly green and clean forms of hydrogen from those made with other methods and feedstock. Instead, green hydrogen is lumped into the ambiguous term renewable hydrogen, which would include hydrogen produced through electrolysis, powered by biomass generated electricity, for example. It appears that LCFS also fails to distinguish electrolyzed hydrogen from that produced through catalytic cracking and steam reformation of biomethane, and biomethane being that from landfills and the dairy digesters we've heard so many voice concerns about. And I guess I'm not fully, or I guess I'm looking for some sort of reasoning for why we are not separating truly green and clean forms of hydrogen from those produced from methane. And I think we could maybe do an olfactory exercise if you've driven by like a huge CAFO or dairy farm, and just think about that smell that you smell when you drive by, and then think about when you're at the ocean and the smell you smell there. And saying that the hydrogen produced from both those sources is both the same, I think just going off smell, that's not true. So hopefully that depiction helps us think about that. But by pitting green hydrogen against biomethane and other sources, I really think we're going to harm the innovation. And I don't think we'll look back on this and be proud of ourselves when we explain it to our children. So I hope that we can differentiate and distinguish and use words to mean what we mean. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Brett. Next is Esther Portillo. Your line has been unmuted.
Okay, I think I'm unmuted. Good afternoon, EJAC members. Thank you for your time and dedication in addressing this important issue. My name is Esther Portillo. I'm representing the Natural Resource Defense Council, NRDC. We would like to provide the following public comment on the LCFS program and elevate our continued concerns. We'll be providing our official comment letter to CARB later this month. In our review of the eyesore, our recommendations continue to be the same, and we urge that CARB make the needed changes to the LCFS program to ensure that California has the ability to reduce climate emissions and protect communities. We strongly believe that if the eyesore staff recommendations were to be adopted, the LCFS program would continue to contribute to poor local air and water quality and perpetuate environmental injustices by over-incentivizing livestock, biomethane, and other problematic combustion fuels. This comes at a significant detriment to the climate, the food system, the environment, and environmental justice communities. These problems must be addressed through improvements to the LCFS. NRDC calls on CARB to take the following steps to ensure that the LCFS supports climate targets and commitment to environmental justice. Number one, correct the overcrediting of livestock biomethane by 2024 and open a new proceeding to address agriculture emissions in their own right. Extending to 2040 as recommended by staff is not a feasible alternative. Number two, implement a cap on all lipid-based feedstocks and develop an updated CI score for the fuels associated with those feedstocks. CARB's proposal to certify feedstocks for sustainability does nothing at all to address the problem, and feedstocks are fungible, and use of large volumes from certified sustainable sources will still incentivize production from unsustainable sources to fill the vacuum. Number three, eliminate LCFS credits for captured carbon that is utilized for enhanced oil recovery, EOR, in alignment with SB 1314. And number four, continue and enhance electric transportation provisions in the LCFS. Additionally, we recommend capacity credit issue and redirecting unused fuel station funding for EV charging. Number five, require that credited hydrogen be produced only with zero carbon electricity, adhering to the three pillars of additionality, deliverability, and hourly matching. We also highly recommend that the CARB March meeting be only informational and no vote. The LCFS can be a tool for driving forward the transition to a cleaner, healthier, and safer transportation sector but only if CARB ensures LCFS pathways are aligned with California's climate and environmental justice priorities. We urge CARB to make transformative changes to the LCFS programs that will protect communities and our progress on climate. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Michael Wara, and just a flag, Michael is our second to the last commenter we have on Zoom. So last call for folks who want to provide comment. Michael, your line is unmuted.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to comment. My name is Michael Wara. I am the director of the Climate and Energy Policy Program at Stanford University. However, my comments today are my own personal opinion and not those of Stanford or the Woods Institute. I'd just like to reinforce comments that were made earlier by Jeremy Martin with regard to the transparency and procedural issues with this rulemaking. We worked extensively to provide analysis that the Air Resources Board did not feel they had time to do to evaluate both a cap on crop-based biofuels and earlier phase out of book and claim crediting for confined animal feeding operation methane. We found that those did not result in using CARB's model, that those did not result in unacceptable outcomes in terms of CARB's other stated objectives for the program. Unfortunately, in the new rule, and we also found significant problems with CARB's model, which CARB subsequently fixed. Unfortunately, in the current rulemaking, CARB has not released any of the information necessary to evaluate the alternatives that they are proposing or the ones that they reject. And while I understand that there's a Public Records Act request that's been filed, it's just not going to be possible to really evaluate and comment on the proposal, given the position that CARB has taken with respect to specifically input and output files for the CATS modeling that supports the rulemaking. Without those files, we cannot provide informed comment on the rule. I would note that the CARB conclusions with respect to the EJ community proposals are quite different than the results that we found in our modeling, and that's especially why we want to understand the assumptions that ARB is incorporating into their analysis in order to provide, comprehensive and high quality feedback on the proposal. Thank you very much for taking the time today to have this meeting and for listening and hanging on for the extensive public comment.
Thank you. Next, we have Patricia Ramos Anderson. Your line has been unmuted.
Hello, my name is Patricia Ramos Anderson, and I'm part of the League of United Latin American Citizens, and most importantly, also with Defensadoras. I live in Santa Nela, but more importantly, I was raised with my family in the Central Valley. What's very key is that CARB and with LCFS, when we were informed about a meeting, there had not been for the 20 years prior to that, until 2021, when I attended this first meeting by phone, there had not been meaningful community engagement in letting people know about these meetings, bilingual, no translators, no information up until then that we forced that issue. That was the issue that was brought to the attention. And when you don't have meaningful community engagement, you are just saying, we did this meeting, I posted it in the newspaper, and that was it. No, that's not how it works. There have been health impacts of this type of business. More importantly, the public health was never held into consideration when you're adopting a program that's going to impact these communities and not have a process to address those issues. More importantly, CARB and the LMS FS program did not even acknowledge the existence of the comments of the public at every faction of the process, and wouldn't even recognize them in their own reports of their key points and issues that were being brought upon to this committee and others. This was horrible for government to not provide and show that the public was finally getting involved, because they would never had the opportunity. But more important is the public health. You never discuss what public health impacts were already existing in these communities and then continue to impact them with this new type of business. What about a clean environment, clean air? No, there was no accountability in this whole process with the CARB, with this LCFS. They would not even recognize the public residents' comments or even acknowledge their existence or their key points, never including them in any reports or documents. And that's a taxpayer money. The same individuals that you're impacting their communities are taxpayers that you're using at the state to give these folks to make their health and their lives worse. That is public funds being misused, not for the benefit of the public best interest, but for the benefit of self-profit of these business programs that give them all these write-offs. We cannot afford to contaminate the air, put the health risk of communities up for the gain of others' profits that don't even live in these communities. In closing is that we need to hold them accountable. LCFS, not fund them until we have plans that have the voice for the community are there at the table and is documented. Thank you very much for your time. We are taxpayers. We are there. Thank you.
Thank you. Our last commenter for today is Jack Fleck. Jack, your line has been unmuted.
Hi, yes, my name's Jack Fleck. I'm with 350 Bay Area, and I'm looking at the low carbon fuel standards dashboard, and I can't help but notice that it has 6 million tons of credits for electricity, but it has 20 million tons of credits for biomethane, renewable diesel, biodiesel, and ethanol. Now, none of those latter products are going to get us to 100% zero emission transportation system. And a lot of people have been mentioning that the low income people that need charging in their homes, which they don't have it because they live in apartments or they live in communities where electricity is hard to get. These are the kind of things that the LCFS should be subsidizing to make sure that we move as quickly as possible in an equitable way to make sure that everybody can get an affordable electric vehicle. And this is the only way we're going to get to a zero emission transportation system. All of these other things are digressions. They aren't going to get us there. And I would urge you to not vote on this in March, because the whole program needs to have a very thorough transformation, as a number of speakers have said. So those are my points. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, so that is the end of our public comment period. We don't have any more raised hands or folks in the room. I did want to note that we are actually ahead of schedule. Happy to report that. So talk to the co-chairs, and if our court reporter is amenable to this, we did have item 6 on the agenda slated as a break. But what we're proposing is that we move on to next steps and closing remarks, because they are anticipated to be very brief, as I understand it. So Jim, if there's any concerns, if you could raise your hand or add it in the chat, just let us know, because I want to be respectful of your time as well.
If you can hear me, I'm fine. You can just push forward.
Thank you so much for the confirmation.
So this is Dr. Catherine, and then I'll pass it to you, Martha Dina. I just, again, want to close kind of how we started the day, which is thanking everyone for their presence, thanking all of the public commenters, and pointing to our next meeting on Friday, March 15th, where we will look to discuss low carbon fuel standard and possibly a brief item on cap and trade as well. So thank you, everyone, and definitely more work to continue with. Martha Dina?
I want to thank the public comments. They, again, we do listen to your comments, and you provide a really important perspective for us. And, I'm trying to close on a positive note, but I do think what a lot of the public commenters said about sort of our inability to communicate clearly with CARB and to be heard about these key issues that we've been raising for a number of years around the low carbon fuel standard, I think continues to be one of the biggest challenges. And I really hope the board hears us and listens to both experts and the experts in the lived experience of the impacts of the policies, right? They're also experts. and they should not be discounted. And so we hope the board listens to the community and to the EJAC and postpones this decision, because we need to be serious here about the kind of transformation that we need so that our communities do not continue to be the sacrifice zones. And with that, that's all I have to say for today.
Thank you, Martha Dina. I was just looking in the Zoom and I do see that we have one more commenter, but I just wanted to say that we did close the public comment period. So if at all possible, we can have that part of the discussion on March 15th.
Do folks mind having them present now? That's one last speaker? Or is that like against the rules?
No, not against the rules, just want to be mindful of everyone's time. So if everyone's good with that, we can have one less commenter. One last, I should say. Yeah. All right. We have one more commenter. Your line has been unmuted.
Yeah, hi. Thank you all, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to comment really quickly. My colleague was here earlier but had to leave due to some personal commitments. But my name is Faraz Rizvi. I'm with the Asian Pacific Environmental Network. I want to share that, coming from an environmental justice organization, our members are Asian immigrants and refugees that live next to the Chevron Richmond refinery and the Wilmington refineries. The pollution of the refinery spews into our neighborhoods. There are disproportionately families of color and lower income, and this is due to a history of state-sanctioned racist land use and housing policy. Our APIN youth and young adults came to Sacramento to testify about the LCFS. They couldn't join on this call today, but I want to express their great shock, disappointment, and despair with the staff's most recent proposal and initial statement of reasons. Our concerns are, as we've repeatedly stated, first, the exact steam methane reformer SMR process that currently produces pollution and excessively flares next to oil refineries will now receive artificially inflated LCFS credits when paired with overvalued factory farm gas that pollutes in the Central Valley, all under the guise of so-called renewable hydrogen. This form of so-called renewable hydrogen is truly a sophisticated form of environmental racism that exacerbates cumulative pollution in two communities with one crediting pathway. Second, no EJ community supports crop-based biofuels, yet we have approached this rulemaking with an extremely reasonable proposal to merely cap crediting and pending an updated risk assessment to determine phase-out timelines for high-risk crop-based fuels like soybean oil. Third, our communities are still stuck in gas-fueled carbs, so when CARB avoids a more nuanced approach that addresses the root causes of sinking credit prices and simply cranks up the standard stringency, it adds through the pass-through costs at the pump. I know no one likes to hear that, and I promise you we're coming from a perspective that really is looking to emphasize environmental justice when it comes to this policy. CARB staff are proposing again for our communities to take the hit for this program, but this time to their pocketbooks. So we thank the EJAC for their time and their LCFS recommendations, because these are really important to emphasize environmental justice when it comes to one of California's most massive climate programs. Thank you. And thank you for letting me speak.
Thank you, Faraz. And again, to all of the public commenters. I think with that, we can close the meeting and see you back on March 15th, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.